So, to start, a 13-year-old female at the time was going out with a few friends for Halloween. It was a tradition that stopped after that night, but we would all get together and go out and have a good time, and then head to one of our houses to watch horror movies until the sunrise the next morning. For some stupid reason, these 6 of us decided to split up. So Sarah, I'm not using the real names, and Alex went the one way towards Sarah's house because she was tired. Alice and Jessica went to head towards some more houses to stop at before meeting up with us again, and Rachel and I went off in the opposite direction towards the school. Rachel told me that she wasn't feeling good and that she wanted to head back to Alice's place. So she went back towards Alice's house, leaving me alone. It was around 10 o'clock at night and I was getting cold, so I thought it was a good idea to cut through the park to go to Alice's house. We had decided beforehand to meet back at her house once we were all done. As I was getting close to the park, I could hear some boys laughing about something. I thought it was nothing and just ignored them. When I got to the walkway, I saw about 4 boys standing in the park. One clearly had something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was, and I started walking faster to pass them. They all started walking to the path and blocked me. For reference, I went as Amy Lee, so I had a short, poofy, strapless dress on and high heels. There was no way I was going to outrun them. They started saying stuff like, "Hey, where you off to? Why don't you come say hi to us? What's a girl like you doing here so late?" I gave short answers and tried backing away. I don't really remember how I got away, but I'm pretty sure it's because I sacked one of them. I just remember running like crazy in my crappy heels back to Alice's place. When I got there, all of the other girls were crying. Alex had already gone home, but Alice and Jessica and Rachel were on Alice's front lawn and asked me if I saw those guys in the park. Alice and Jessica had dressed as boys for that year, and apparently those guys tried to fight them. When they figured out they were girls, they were grabbing at them and making comments. They got away because Alice held her phone up telling them that she was going to call the cops. We decided that we weren't going to go out for Halloween after that, and eventually we all stopped talking. But before that, we never talked about that night to anyone. In my neighborhood, we don't tend to have many trick-or-treaters. I live only 15 minutes or so from the rich part of town, and most kids between the ages of 8 or 14 beg their parents to drive them over, as some people even give away gift cards depending on how generous they're feeling. I just hand out bagged candy from the local Walmart, and so do my neighbors. So all I ever really get is young kids whose parents take them for the fun of it, and not for the candy itself. This year, I got comfy on my couch around 5:30, and waited for the young kids to start knocking. I'm 17 and quite small, but Halloween has always been my favorite holiday, and I've been handing out candy for many years without my parents home. All was well and good, and by 7:30, most of the traffic had passed, but I decided to keep my lights on until 8:30, in case anyone came back from the other part of town, and wanted to score a few more Kit Kats before tucking in for the night. It was around 8:50, and I was hoping for one more person to knock so I could give them the rest of what was in my bowl. I'm a pretty healthy eater, so I didn't need the temptation of leftover candy. When I saw someone peeking through the windows adjacent to my door. My lights were clearly on, and it's not like I was sitting in the dark, but all of the upstairs lights were off, so I didn't think much of it when I walked over to the door. When I opened the door, still no one had knocked. A very large man, anywhere from 18 to maybe early 20s, was facing me. He was in some sort of feminine anime costume, and his overall vibe was very uncomfortable and off. I grabbed my candy, but I felt too uncomfortable making conversation with him and offering him the bowl, as he was only speaking to me in Japanese. Part of the costume, I guess, and I just really didn't know what was going on. It's hard to explain, but I could feel it in my gut, something was off with him. I handed him some candy and was so nervous that I actually ended up dropping a few pieces, which he very quickly scooped down to pick up and used as an opportunity to stand back up uncomfortably close to me, almost in my doorway. I quickly closed the door, not even saying have a good night or anything like I usually do. And when I started to turn the lock, I saw out of the corner of my eye another man, probably 18 or 19, out of costume, peeking into one of my windows in a room further down in my house but still connected to the front area. The man at the front door must have said something to him because, in enough time for me to step back, they both very quickly ran together through my grass and towards the exit to my neighborhood, not stopping at a single other house until they were out of sight. I know this seems very anticlimactic and nothing actively happened to me, but I've never had someone older than 15 knock on my door in all the years I've lived here, and I have no idea how long they were standing there. So, random men who peeked into the windows of a 17-year-old girl's house. Let's not meet. It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are aged 7 and 9. Usually, I stay on the street while my kids go up to the different houses to collect candy. After about half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So, I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird, homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, so I figured it was just a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It's kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, huh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me, while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes, until suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me as we hadn't been out for too long and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick-or-treat, and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at the story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing, the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out and they wanted to just get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what had happened. We made sure to check through all of their candy but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything, since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was that old woman doing? And who was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween, hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. Last night had to be the most frightening minutes of my life. It's 10:30 p.m. The baby is down for bedtime. I'm in the bedroom trying to fall asleep. Next thing I know, the doorbell rings. It's 10:30 at night. Who the heck is ringing my doorbell? It's going to wake the baby and I'm near angry and a little shaken. I peer through the people and see two men that look like they're in their early to mid-20s. At that point, I just get scared. What are two strangers doing and ringing and knocking at 10:30 at night, especially on Halloween night? I froze for a minute and just watched. They kept ringing and knocking. I retreated to the bedroom to grab my phone. I called my fiance, because I'm not smart and should have called the police first, but he doesn't answer as he's asleep and 6 hours away for an FTX. They just keep ringing and knocking for about 5 minutes. They aren't giving up. Some sense kicks in that I should call the police a non-emergency line. I didn't call 911 because I wasn't sure if it qualified as an emergency. I didn't know what they wanted. Right as the dispatcher takes my name and address, they leave. I tell the dispatcher to cancel the report, and he tells me that if they come back, just call 911. I've never been so scared in my life. I'm home alone with the baby while the fiance is away. I've never felt so threatened in my own home. My fiance is hoping that they were either trying to prank someone or that they were drunk trying to get into the wrong apartment. My instinct tells me that they weren't friendly, and my instinct is usually right. I was nearly defenseless in my own home. I'm not about to open the door to two strange people. I'm still shaking today. I don't want to leave the apartment. I really hope they don't come back again. I would rather not have to threaten that I have a weapon, now that I know where it is, and will use it if absolutely necessary as a last line of defense. I would rather not encounter them again. I hope they stay away. First time posting, I had a strange unsolved experience as a kid that has been on my mind a lot lately, and decided that this is a place to share. The first half of the story takes place on Halloween, 1991. A quick bit of background. I was a 7-year-old boy at the time and my little sister was only a few months old. I lived in Long Island, New York, on the border area of the town that kind of acted as an unspoken separation between the more affluent area and the lower income, hood type area. My dad owned a bar across from the train station that was extremely popular in the 80s. Man was still riding the tail end of that boom. My father did very well for himself. My father and his business were well known around the town. I think this may have had to do with what happened. He eventually squandered everything on a drug addiction, but that's a different story. And for the record, I had nothing but love and respect for him despite this. So, it was Halloween. My mom was working the night shift at my dad's bar. My sister was home with a teenage babysitter. My dad had taken me and my friend trick-or-treating. This was the first year I was able to go out at night, so I was super stoked. When we get home, there are cops at my house. The babysitter is crying and my mom came home. Earlier, while the sitter was alone with my sister, she got a phone call from an unknown woman asking to speak with me. She said that I wasn't there and asked the woman stated that she had a gift for me and would call back. The woman called back a few times saying something similar and she began to insist that she was going to come and deliver her gift. Eventually she called and said to look in the mailbox. This is when the sitter called the police. The police found a pirate skull Halloween decoration that would talk and shake when you clapped, as well as several candy bars. My whole family was really bugged out about this. I was scared, but I also kind of liked the skull thing and convinced my parents after much protest to let me keep it. My parents for a few weeks were on edge after that, and they hated the toy. They tried to work with the police, but there wasn't much they could do, and the whole thing kind of went cold. Fast forward to the following summer, 1992. My best friend and I decided to have a car wash in front of his house, which was diagonally across the street from my house. We had out buckets, soap, a hose, and a sign. You get the picture. This black car rolls up. It was an old 80s Crown Vic or something like that. one of those big cars that steer like a boat. The window rolls down and there's a woman sitting in the driver's seat. She has short white hair, kinda had this whole Ursula vibe going. I told my parents she was old because of her hair, but looking back, she could have been as young as in her 40s. She says, my name. Do you know who I am? I said no, and she goes, I'm the one who gave you those nice presents on Halloween. My jaw drops and I freeze up just staring. And then like something out of a horror movie, she begins to laugh maniacally and then speeds off. I ran home and told my parents. That was the end of it, and they never figured out who it was. My father had speculated that this person may have believed he was wealthy, and maybe he was trying to get a ransom. Maybe she was a scorned ex-lover. I don't know, I've speculated many things, but will never likely know at this point, as I am now 35 and that was a lifetime ago. Sorry if this story had an underwhelming payoff at the end, but it has bugged me for years and I wanted to share it. In the past year, I've had several of my dad's old friends find and reach out to me on Facebook. My dad and I have the same name and face, so I was easy to find. 2 of them are women. One of them made me a little uncomfortable because she kept pushing to hang out, and she's a lot older than me. Like, go to the bar hangout. I said no, of course, but she asked me a lot of personal questions. And that's what brought the story back to the forefront of my mind. I'm getting a weird feeling in my gut that this woman, or even the other ones on Facebook, is the same woman that stalked me as a child. That thought gives me a chill, but I would really like to know who this person was and why they stalked me. I hope this is the right place for the story. This happened about 12 years ago. I was 16 at the time. It was summer and I was hanging out with my friend Leanne and a guy that I liked, Billy. We were sitting around trying to figure out something fun to do when Billy said, let's go to a haunted house. Leanne and I were goth girls at the time and got really excited by this suggestion. I don't really know what we thought we would do. Maybe sit around in a dark house and talk to ghosts, but we drove an hour to a haunted house. The house sat all alone in a giant field of overgrown grass. I don't remember what time it was, but it was dark and there weren't any streetlights near the house and all the windows were boarded up. We marched through the grass and I, wanting to seem cool, marched to the front door first. Again, wanting to appear cool in front of my crush, I decided to be the one to open the door and go in first. I reached out, the door was unlocked and I pushed it open. It was pitch black inside, I couldn't see into the house at all. It was like a blanket of blackness was in front of me. I then got an eerie feeling, the kind of feeling you get when someone is watching you. I felt like someone was standing in front of me in the blackness. That's when I heard it, just a few feet in front of me. The quiet and steady sound of someone breathing. I lost it. I started screaming and I turned around and ran away. Leanne and Billy started laughing and followed me nonchalantly. I ran all the way back to the car where they both started making fun of me. What was that? Leanne asked. Breathing, I heard breathing. Someone was breathing. You probably heard one of us, said Billy. No, it was in front of me. Someone was breathing. They continued to make fun of me, telling me it was my imagination, but I was adamant. They tried to convince me to go inside with them, but I refused. I was not going in there. I was creeped out and had a very bad feeling. I was not going in that house. After about 20 minutes, they gave up and we all decided on a new plan for the night. A few days later, Leanne approached me. So, I told my mom about that house we went to the other night. She said that house is a well-known squatter house where homeless people, drug addicts, and crazies hang out. I'm so glad we didn't go inside. To this day, I know for a fact someone was standing in front of me. I don't know what would have happened had we gone inside, but I'm so happy we didn't. Several years ago, I was maybe 19 or 20, and we lived in the state's capital. Some family friends were coming to visit us during that summer, and my mom wanted to cook a particular dish for them. This dish is best served the next day as the flavors had time to develop. However, we needed chorizo sausage to make the dish, something my mom forgot about until 7 p.m. that night. As this was in the Midwest, chorizo was hard to come by, so a quick Google search revealed a small butcher shop close to our state capitol building. Mom called and they said that they had chorizo. Dad volunteered to go get it and I agreed to go along because I was bored. When we got into our nice Cadillac Escalade, this is important to note, plugged the directions into our GPS and drove down. And while we were maybe 100 yards away from our state's capitol building, which is actually pretty nice, the neighborhood this butcher shop was in was not. The streetlights were out, windows were dark, houses had peeling paint. Some were boarded up and there were no cars in sight or anyone else around, not even walking their dogs. Something about this place gave me a weird vibe and I mentioned to Dad that we should get the heck out of there. But we had a mission and good luck trying to convince Dad to change his mind about something. We go into this butcher shop, and I don't know how in the world they managed to run without a visit from the health inspector, but holy cow, was it bad. It was hot and sticky inside, and I didn't hear any humming from the display cases, meaning the cooling elements weren't working. Inside the grimy display case are pork trotters, pig ears, and pork belly, and the flies were buzzing around them. The floors hadn't been mopped or even swept in God knows how long. How do I know this? Because we're leaving shoe imprints and our shoe prints were the only ones there. As I pretended to busy myself by browsing the shelves, in reality, I was scanning the store and watching the exit for trouble because I didn't feel right being there. Dad asked the husband and wife manning the counter about the chorizo, to which they responded that they had sold out of the last of it, but they had plenty of fresh ingredients to make our own for the right price. As Dad was trying to get his way out of their haggling and asking for directions for the closest grocery store, I noticed movement outside the smudged-in, smeared glass door. There were 4 burly-looking shadows outside, close to our car, which wasn't the only car out there, but a beautiful Escalade with all the bells, whistles, and it had just been detailed. In other words, we were a giant bullseye. Thinking fast, I pretended to look at my phone. "Hey Dad, Mom asked Lucia and she had plenty of chorizo," I said, a bit more cheerily than I had intended. Before Dad could ask what the heck was going on, I grabbed his arm and tugged at him. After a quick thank you, we got out of there. Fortunately, the burly shapes were gone. My knees were like jello, wobbling, and I was still on the adrenaline high. Dad was looking at me confused. "Hey, we don't even know a Lucia," he said as he unlocked the car door. "I know, I just wanted to get out of there because I had a bad feeling," I admitted as we both got in, locked the doors, and turned on the ignition. The car's headlights turned on, and not even 10 feet away were the 4 burly shapes. They were just standing there. They were 4 men, middle-aged, dressed in jeans, t-shirts, and caps. I noticed one of them was holding a crowbar, and they started walking towards us. I screamed, "Dad, get out of here." He didn't need to be told twice. Dad gunned it and the Escalade, which is built for not only beauty but speed, accelerated. The men jumped out of the way and we took off down the road. We didn't stop until we were home. Mom was more glad we were okay than about the chorizo, especially when she learned what had happened. Fortunately, we were able to find some the next day at a reputable supermarket that specialized in Latino food. So, 4 guys dressed like thugs and carrying a crowbar. Let's not meet. I'm going to tell you the story of a terrifying old creep that had stalked me since I was 16 years old. I'm currently a 20-year-old female. So basically, to set the scene, I'm an average height, average size, 20-year-old female. I've been told I'm very approachable and perhaps too nice to strangers. I sometimes just don't have the heart to tell them to get away, and I definitely should. Obviously, I'm not going to give specific details, but I worked in a restaurant which was inside a bigger shopping center. My stalker, an old man named Eric, worked for the actual shopping center itself and not a store inside it like me. When I was 16 and first started my job, I was quite timid and awkward, and let anyone say pretty much anything to me. I didn't quite know what to say when older customers and other employees would make inappropriate comments to me. I would simply just laugh off whatever people would say or not respond. In my 16-year-old mind, this was a lot easier to handle. I had one other friend at my job who was my age, and her name was Jessica. Jessica had worked there for a lot longer than I had, and one day she asked me if I had heard of this guy who worked in the shopping center called Eric. Jessica described Eric as very strange. She didn't describe him as frightening or unsettling, or even someone to be afraid of, just as a very eccentric man. Really, she and other employees would laugh at his odd sayings and awkward behavior. Jessica has also told me that Eric had brought her a present on Valentine's Day: chocolate. Many would think this was friendly behavior or harmless flirting, if he wasn't a 50-something-year-old man bringing chocolates to a 16-year-old girl he barely knows. I began to see for myself that Eric wasn't just an innocent old man with a slight crush. He had other intentions. The first time I remember Eric approaching me was when I was filling up a machine near the entrance of my work. The machine was out of the view of all of the employees and the restaurant was empty, so this was pretty much the perfect time for a creep to approach without being seen. Eric wasn't supposed to enter my place of work when he was working at the shopping center, so he had deliberately gone out of his way to come and speak to me. To describe his appearance, he was your typical creepy old loner. He was gaunt, had gray hair with bald patches, and had beady little eyes which he never averted from yours, and I can't get him out of my head till this day. Eric must have sneaked up on me, as I looked up and he was standing right next to me, a little too close, and I could feel his breath on my cheek. "My name is Lucy," Eric asked me. "Lucy, are you married?" He almost giggled after he asked me this. He had a smirk on his face which made me feel as if he was trying to pretend that he thought I was older than I was, and at 16, I looked 16. Eric liked to ask me questions that he already knew the answer to, just to see what my reaction would be, letting me know in his own way that he had been looking up information about me on social media. He would do this frequently. I began to clock onto the fact that Eric had been going a little further than just approaching me at work, and instead stalking my social media accounts in the weeks following this first encounter, such as Twitter and Instagram, when he began asking me very specific questions about things I had posted about in the days before. For example, I had posted on Instagram about a tattoo that I got, which was in homage to my favorite band. I was serving a customer one day, only to be interrupted by a shrill but quiet voice. It was Eric. His eyes were huge and he had a look of pure excitement and menace on his face. He had yet again entered my workplace when he wasn't supposed to, just to talk to me. He asked me, "Lucy, what's your favorite, insert the band's name here, song?" Eric relished in my discomfort. You could see by my reaction that I was clocking on the fact that he had been viewing my personal social media, and the thought of that made my blood run cold. I felt disgusting and violated. The tattoo that I had gotten was covered by my work uniform, so the only way you could have seen it was by going through my Instagram page. This creeped me out majorly, but somehow I just forced myself to forget all about it and I carried on working. Over the course of a few months, Eric would come into my workplace more and more frequently, asking me bizarre questions and still reciting back to me things that I had tweeted about or posted on Instagram. Every time I would see him, I would get visibly uncomfortable, and he liked this and this is what he wanted. All the while this was happening, Jessica approached me and let me know that Eric had followed her in his car on her walk home from work, slowing down to ask her where she lived. I also had been told other disturbing news about Eric from multiple different people. It seemed as if he was becoming more invested in whatever his intentions were towards me and Jessica. News had traveled to one of my managers about Eric's unsettling actions towards me, and this manager informed me that A few years ago, Eric was rumored to have followed a young girl who used to work for our restaurant into a toilet. Things didn't quite make sense to me. He was known for being a creep, yet still employed at the shopping center. On one hand, I was glad to know I wasn't just creeped out for no reason. But on the other hand, I was frightened as he had been doing this for years, yet no one had stopped him. Anyways, there was a woman who worked at the same place as me called Rebecca, and she had some sort of disability which caused her to befriend and be trusting to people without knowing anything about them. It seems that Eric took advantage of her, as he had asked for her phone number and she gave it to him. Rebecca had shown me her text messages with Eric. He had texted her things like, "Rebecca, are you alone?" and "Rebecca, are you sat on the bus alone?" But the most unsettling part of it all was the text from Eric that read, "Rebecca, could you please let me know any information on the girls that work at insert restaurant name here?" I was stunned. This was quite slowly turning into my nightmare. I was constantly questioning why this old man was so hell-bent on finding out everything to do with my life. Why me? He had gone out of his way to source information about me through a vulnerable person that I worked with, and I was scared that he was going to go further. Again, this creeped me out, but still, for some reason, I forgot about it and carried on with my life, which was very hectic at the time. And in a way, I'm grateful that I didn't have the time to dwell on Eric's growing obsession. However, this was something I wouldn't be able to ignore forever, as Eric began inserting himself into my life in ways I just couldn't ignore or brush off. One night, I was watching the movie Grease with my family, and I must have tweeted something stupid like, "Grease is my favorite film," because it's a great film, right? Anyways, the morning after my tweet, Eric approaches me in his usual way and utters, "Do you like the film Grease, Lucy?" The same usual smirk lit up his face and the same usual wave of disgust washed over me. He was really making it a point to let me know that he was watching me. I tried to carry on with my day, but spent the entirety of my shift feeling a little shaken up. To someone reading this story, it may not seem as unsettling to you as it did to me at the time, but when someone is going out of their way to make you know they know information about you, you spend every waking hour about what they plan to do with this information, and why they insist on taunting you with this knowledge. The very second I clocked out of work and got into my car, my phone went off. This was a notification for PayPal. I clicked on the notification to see that I had received £3 from an Eric Stanley, and the note attached to it read, "To Lucy, Grease is the word, from Eric." He literally found my PayPal account and sent me £3 with a quote from the movie attached to it. If this wasn't crazy enough, in the days following, I received a string of anonymous calls, incessant calls one after the other. I was in a flood of tears and ended up having a huge panic attack. I felt like there was no escape. My phone rang and rang and rang all night. I had to turn it off to get away. Even when I turned my phone back on, the calls continued, and every time my phone would ring, my head felt like I was being impaled with the sharpest knife in the world. I was on complete edge. The phone calls that I did answer were just someone breathing down the phone, making a point to breathe heavy. I even swear that they were trying to sound like they were playing with themselves, which sickened me. I had no proof this was Eric, but it wasn't hard to put two and two together, after all the lengths he had gone in order to track down my personal information. If he had found out my PayPal address, my phone number, and all of my social media accounts, what was stopping him from finding where I live, breaking in, hurting me or my family? That night, I had horrific dreams in which he chased me around my house and taunted me for hours. I still have similar dreams and struggle to sleep without my boyfriend present, as I'm scared he's standing right outside my door to this day. I reported Eric to my managers and they passed my complaint on to the managers of the shopping center. At this point, I was genuinely scared for my safety. Multiple girls added to my statement and added details of times they had witnessed Eric's unsettling behavior, or times that he had been inappropriate with them too. Eric had been cautioned by the shopping center's management, yet nothing was done, except the fact that he was warned not to talk to me. Eric found ways about getting around the no talking to Lucy rule. He would make animal noises at me when he would see me, like a monkey or a dog or any bizarre noise that would get my attention. I think he just wanted me to think that he had outsmarted me, that he had found a way around the rules. After this, I stopped working at the restaurant as a full-time job. I saw Eric less and less, which was obviously great for me. I moved cities as I went away for university and made new friends which distracted me from my old life in my hometown. I still thought about Eric every now and then, and when I focus on it for too long, I can't be alone, out of fear that he's still keeping tabs on me. The thought of that terrifies me. After moving away and starting my new life, I forgot all about the twisted man who used to obsess over me at my old job. I forgot he existed, but I was soon going to remember. On Christmas Day, I was back home in my hometown with my parents. My phone buzzed and I expected it to just be another message from a friend or a family member, but I was wrong. I received a notification from PayPal. It was the exact amount of £3, only not from Eric this time, but from a girl whose name I didn't recognize at all. I opened up the PayPal app only to see a note attached to this payment that I had received. The note read, "Sending on behalf of Eric." My blood ran cold again. I had forgotten all about this man and all he had done to make me feel unsafe and unsettled, and here he was again, antagonizing me, yet this time doing it through other people. Perhaps his way of telling me that him being banned from talking to me himself won't stop him from entering my world. I threw my phone down on the couch and spent the night drinking with family, until I forgot about the notification. I probably should have told somebody about it, but I just wanted to do as much as I could to block him out. I didn't want him to control me anymore, and since I hadn't seen or heard anything from him, I wanted it to stay that way. I think Eric still works at that shopping center and lives local to me. I avoid my old workplace so I don't have to see him, and he doesn't have to see me. So, to the creepy, beady-eyed freak that made me live in fear, let's not meet again. As a child, think kindergarten age, I loved to talk. If anyone had a question for me, I would gleefully give them way too much information. Most people found it endearing and would praise me for being so smart, which only encouraged me a lot. My mom and I normally shopped at the market just a few minutes away from our house. My mom had been shopping there for 20-some years at that point and was friends with most of the workers, so I was friendly with them too, and was always happy to talk with them. Whenever my mom got distracted talking to someone, I, with the attention span of a 6-year-old, would wander around the aisle. My mom would keep an eye on me to make sure that I didn't get too far, but if she was distracted, one of the employees would usually be around and gently guide me back over. One day though, we went to a different market that I couldn't remember having been to before, and we didn't go back to for nearly a decade. We were walking around the aisles when my mom ran into her friend. They started talking and I, not even realizing that I no longer had a store full of adults keeping an eye on me, started wandering around the aisle. My eyes caught some colorful display, I think flowers or balloons or something, and I went over to look. Once I was satisfied with my inspection, I turned back to the aisle only to find my mom wasn't there. That had never happened before. I looked around a little, though not moving from my spot near the colorful displays. Since it was right near the registers, there was a decent amount of people nearby, which I'm thankful for now. As I was looking around, an employee came up to me. He was older than my sister, she was 12 or 13 at the time, and younger than my dad, in his mid-40s, which was about the only way I could gauge age. Now, I would say he was probably in his early to mid-20s if I remember right. "Hey there," he said sweetly, in that tone you normally speak to kids in. I cheerfully said hello, actually stepping a little closer. "Are you looking for your mommy?" I said yes, happily explaining that I had just last seen her talking to her friend, and that I could normally find her easily when I wandered away, so I wasn't sure where she could have gone. Does she leave you alone often? Not really. My older sister was normally with me if my mom wasn't. She was 12 or 13 and she was super mature. So if my mom had to leave for a little bit, she knew I would be okay. And she never left us alone in public. Just at home if she needed to run somewhere. Never for very long. Just the length of time of a Pokemon episode or something. And my dad was at work a lot, and didn't come back until late usually. Just if you were wondering. Where do you live? Well, wouldn't you know, I just learned my address. We just learned how to mail a letter in school. Even took a little class trip to the mailbox in our school corner to send them out. I knew how to write my address now, and I knew how to say it. You want to hear? Of course you do. I know kids are naive, but I was downright dumb. I was diagnosed with doodle color blindness 2 years later, otherwise known as red-green color blindness. Makes sense, as I was totally blind to all the red flags. Where do you go to school? Who picks you up? Well, I go to the local elementary school. I don't know the address though, sorry, but I know what street it's on, because I wait on the sidewalk for my mom or a daycare sitter depending on the day. So I see the street line a lot since I'm usually waiting for a while to be grabbed. Do you like animals? Like puppies? Dogs scare me, cats scare me, pigeons scare me, fish scare me, flies scare me. But you know what doesn't scare me? Turtles. I have 5 turtles. No dogs that might bark or bite if someone drops by the house, like our neighbor does. Those dogs are always behind the gate though, so they don't scare me a lot. It had only been a few minutes since I last saw my mom. Even with how much information I was dumping, I was a very fast talker. But I was starting to get a little antsy. Not because I was uncomfortable talking to a stranger, but because I had skipped lunch that day specifically to con my mom into letting me get a bagel from the store next door, which was why we were at that market in the first place. My mom was holding onto the bagel to make sure that I didn't try to eat it too fast and choke, which I had done several times in the past. I wanted my bagel, and while I liked talking to this grown man who made me feel smart and was also interested in my life, I liked bagels more. Plus, if I called my mom when we were near the bakery section, I might be able to use my charming cuteness to get a cookie. So I gotta find my mom now. Oh well, I'll walk around with you and help you find her. You want to lead me through the market you work at where you could easily bring me to the back room, meat locker, any number of places. Yeah, that sounds good. Ozzy! I look around to see my mom. The relieved look on her face slowly changing into something more anxious. I smile happily and wave her over. She immediately grabs my hand and I can tell she wants to chide me, probably for leaving the aisle, but she seems more occupied on the man in front of me. Before I can even open my mouth to introduce him, or whatever that, I never even got his name, he quickly says that he was glad I found my mom and he needs to get back to work, and practically runs to the back of the store. My mom puts her hand on my shoulders and looks me in the eye, her expression a lot more worried now. What was he talking to you about? She asked, her voice more serious than I had ever heard her. Can I have my bagel? My mom opens her mouth, pauses, and goes into her purse to hand me the bagel. Between bites, I happily tell her about the conversation and everything I remembered. My age and grade, pickup schedule, likes and dislikes, my literal address. My mom gradually becomes paler, and then became red with anger. She brought me over to the manager and I don't remember much about the conversation. I got a cookie, I remember that pretty well. It was shaped like a watermelon, which was apparently far more important to me than paying attention to what was being said. The police weren't called. We went home and my mom told me I wasn't allowed to walk around the store anymore. No more talking to any stranger, even if they worked at the store we were at, unless she was with me. And if I ever saw that man ever again, I was to run away, find someone I know and ask for help. If all else fails, scream at the top of my lungs, just like when a fly lands on me. God, insects are creepy. I agree pleasantly, not really fazed by anything she's saying. I know that some people are bad, but bad people look bad, right? They talk mean and look scary and try to grab you. This guy didn't, so he wasn't bad, was he? But if my mom was saying it, then I would listen. And I better enjoy that cookie because we weren't going back to the store ever again. Tears incoming. In exchange, I can get a donut once a month from our usual store. Tears canceled. When I was around 12, our school had a safety assembly and was talking about these shady things adults do to get close to kids. And a very, very watered down version of what they most likely wanted. And I'm sitting there listening and suddenly realize, oh, if my mom hadn't found me, something bad might have happened. If not in the store, then in front of my school. And if not in front of my school, then my house. A little over a decade later, I'm 18 now, and I've never seen the guy again. Let's keep it that way. I'm an 18-year-old female, and just started a job at a hotel a little over a month ago as a housekeeper. The hotel is located in the very rural Midwest, and not a super busy hotel except for the occasional family reunions checking in, and the few workers passing through the state. Many of the people who come through are older, 40s, 50s, and upwards. When I first started, my parents had told me to be careful because the hotel was sketchy. I never really found it to be sketchy, or the people passing through to be until one day about 2 weeks ago. I had just clocked in around 10:30 and headed down to the end of the hall opposite of where the lobby was to start on my stayovers, rooms where people had stayed more than one night. At the end of the hall, there were 4 rooms tucked into almost a corner, I want to say. You can't really see the doors to these rooms until you reach the end of the hallway. There are 2 rooms on one side, 2 on the other. I was grabbing all the supplies I needed to do the stayover when a man, another stayover, came out of one of the 4 rooms and asked how to work the coffee machine. He was about 3 times the size of me. 6'3", around 300 pounds, where I'm 5'3" and about 125. Didn't seem like a big deal or weird. I'm pretty friendly and outgoing, and I can make a little small talk. I went back to cleaning the other room and minding my business when he comes out again to tell me his room didn't need attended to. I figured so and was glad that was another room I could check off my list. My manager had come down the hall to a strip of room that had checked out, and I turned down the hall to go strip another room when the man came out of his room again. I assumed he had another question about something in the room, so I turned around to speak to him. He asked, "Aren't you scared to do your job?" And I replied, "No, not really. Since I rarely ever have any interaction with guests as a housekeeper." He then went on to say that I was awfully pretty, and that I needed mace or a weapon to protect myself. And I showed him my car keys that I kept in my pocket for that exact reason. The conversation at first wasn't really off-putting, but when I realized what he was getting at with my body, it flooded with anxiety. He then said, "I don't think car keys are enough. You're small and could get easily snatched up." And in that moment, I went into the room my manager was in across the hall, and waited for him to go back into his room before continuing my job as normal as possible. That experience really shook me up, and I sat in another room down the hall for about an hour, crying and having anxiety attacks because I thought this man would try to find me in whatever room I was in and kidnap me. To the man who stayed in room 131 a few weeks ago, let's not meet. This happened a few years ago, but I still think about it to this day. I was on holiday in a city on the other side of the country celebrating my 21st birthday with my best friend. We were having an amazing night out with a few too many drinks and ended up meeting two guys. Let's call them Andrew and Billy. They seemed like really cool guys and we were into them. So when they asked us back to their hotel room, we said yes. Obviously a silly idea, but we were young and drunk. Things were great on the way back to the hotel room. We were all laughing and having a great time. When we got back to the hotel room, there were two other men there as well. Let's call them Ricky and JD, who were at least 10 to 15 years older than us. They gave us creepy vibes, but we brushed it off. We asked Andrew and Billy who these guys were, and they said that they were their colleagues as they were in the city for work and the company had paid for the rooms. So Andrew and Billy were in different rooms, but we were all partying in Andrew's room that he shared with Ricky. I got a little bit too drunk and my friend put me to bed. She said that she was going to Billy's room and asked if I would be okay with Andrew, and I said yes. Keep in mind, my friend didn't have a phone either, so we basically had no way of getting in contact with each other. Another stupid thing, I know. So, I had been in the bed for a while with Andrew, just talking and chilling when he says, "I just have to pop out and I'll be right back." I assumed he meant just out of the bedroom, not out of the actual hotel room. But he left the hotel room to get something from Billy's hotel room. Anyway, I was just watching TV in bed when the bedroom door opens, and I assumed it was Andrew. But my heart sank when it was Ricky, the weird colleague. He walked into the room and sat on the bed. Keep in mind, I'm very naked at this point, trying to cover myself with a blanket. He said, "You do realize that everyone has left you alone in here, right? It's just you, all alone. No one is here and no one can hear you." And he continued edging closer and closer to me on the bed. At this point, I was completely speechless and absolutely terrified. I was completely frozen in fear and I had no idea what to do. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. He definitely sensed my fear, and for some reason, he just got up and left. A sense of relief flooded me, and I felt silly for overreacting. That wasn't until I heard JD, the other random colleague, shouting, "Get the heck back in there! What are you doing? This isn't what we discussed. Get the heck back in there and do what you were meant to do. Who gives a crap about that girl? Just get back in there and do what you need to do." I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in, because I was so scared, but there was no way out, and the only way out of the hotel room was through the front door, and I had to walk past Ricky and JD to get there. I was just so terrified. I had a million thoughts rushing through my head, and I had no idea what to do, but I knew I had to escape. I decided my only option was to just leave the room and be ready to defend myself if things were to go pear-shaped. I threw my clothes on and I grabbed my shoes. I opened the door and Ricky and JD were sitting on the couch close to the bedroom door. JD said, "Hey sexy, where are you going in such a rush? Come and join us, come here right now." I said, "No thanks," and ran to the front door and ripped it open. When I got out, I was so relieved, but I was still in a random hotel in a random city, with no way to contact my friend. But I thought my best option was to just go to the lobby and wait. As I was walking, I heard two men yelling down the hall. "Where are you? We know you aren't too far away. Come back and join us. You know you want to." It was Ricky and JD. I was absolutely terrified at this point, and I began sprinting to the elevator. Now I could hear them gaining on me. I never knew I could run so fast, but I just continued and didn't look back. I felt like I was running forever until I reached the end of the corridor, and my worst nightmare had come true. I missed the turnoff of the elevator. I'm an idiot, I know. So I had to turn and run back towards where I could hear Ricky and JD still yelling down the hallway. I found the elevator and got in. I could hear their voices getting louder and louder, and I didn't want to imagine what would happen if they got into the elevator with me. The door finally closed after what felt like a lifetime. I thought I would go down to the lobby and just wait there because at least there would be people there, so there would be some form of safety. I got to the lobby and realized that there was no one in sight. No one at all, not even behind the desk. I sat on a couch and didn't know what to do with myself. I was absolutely terrified that Ricky and JD would come to the lobby. Then I heard the elevator ding and the door open. My heart dropped, but it was Andrew. I told him what had happened, and he was outraged that his colleagues did that, and he took me to where my best friend was. Everything turned out fine, but it could have been a lot worse. So Ricky and JD, let's never meet again. At the time of events, my brother, my father, and I, a 16-year-old male, are road tripping through Nevada and California as my graduation gift. It is the end of August, and after a long trip, coming from Las Vegas, cruising through Los Angeles, and heading north across to California, we decide to stay in beautiful Santa Barbara for a few days. My father finds a place to stay not too far from the beach, and we are all in wonder as to the movie-like beauty of the city that we are staying in. In the evening of our first night there, being back to the place shortly after feasting on greasy and savory pizza from Rusty's Pizza Parlor, and walking along one of the most beautiful beaches in the USA, I start to get bored in the room. After having watched the television with my father and my brother for about an hour, to change the scenery a bit, I decide to peek through our room window. As I kneel on the raspy purple carpeted floor and draw the thick and heavy curtains out, a sense of dread takes hold of my whole being. I'm startled by the thing I see right across the street, about 100 feet from my window. What I'm looking at is at odds with the beautiful picture-like frame created by the hotel lobby entrance arc, delimiting it from my field of view. A beautiful shadow and light setting created by the streetlight beam on the pavement on the other side of the road reveals this man whose physical traits are hooded by the shadows cast downward by the light. Right under the streetlight, he is standing half in the light, half in the dark of the night, as if in the knowing of the effect the lighting has on him. He looks like he's in his late 20s, early 30s, and stares right at me. His gaze, like a laser beam, I can feel all the way down to my kidneys. I can't see his crazy eyes from this distance, but I can feel them, as my subconscious picks up on the intent, which is not good. He seems to have waited for me to look at him for a long time, as if he knew it would happen. He seems to have known, just as you know you will hear thunder after seeing a lightning. A few seconds after he's made aware of my awareness of his presence, still staring at me, he starts in a slow, clock-like motion, sliding his index finger sideways across his throat, underneath his jaw from left to right, over and over again. It is as if he is silently telling me, "I'll kill you. That's right, I'll do it. Yes, yes." As the floor beneath me starts to sink and a taste of metal overwhelms the top of my tongue, I close the curtains as quick as if my life depends on it. I then turn my upper body away from the window, towards my father, and tell him what I saw. He seems to shrug it off, and talking over the baseball game on TV tells me to let it go. But I can feel, along this calm vibe of arrogant carefreeness coming from him, a hint of uneasiness that I can taste on the back of my mouth. 30 seconds go by, and I stupidly kneel uncomfortably again on the carpet below the windowsill. After loudly swallowing for luck, against my best judgment, I draw the curtains out a second time, but this time, my hands stop at the width of my head, allowing me to view just enough of the outside world to be able to grasp at what is happening outside of my seemingly safe room. There he is again. Only this time, the man is standing 2/3 of the way to where he stood the first time I saw him. His facial traits are now darkened by the lack of a streetlight, but I can still feel his crazy gaze. He is under the hotel lobby parking lot arc. There is not much light where he stands, but I can still perceive him doing his throat-slicing gesture. That's right. I'll kill you. He still communicates to me through his pantomime. There is this desperate feeling of unfair doom in realizing that your poor, vulnerable self is the target of something evil that doesn't even know you as a being, with needs and fears but knows and wants something from you which you are oblivious to. I'm starting to feel queasy and frightened. I close the curtains quickly once again, and tell my dad again of the man's presence and his approaching of the room. I get on the bed, trying to concentrate on the TV to forget what I've just witnessed. I don't remember if my dad looks through the window to confirm what's happening. I remember him telling me to stop looking outside, if what I see is scaring me, and that we are safe in the room, which is locked. After what seems like a few minutes passing, I peek again for the last time. This time, the man is right in the parking lot, about 50 feet from our room, doing his gesture again. I start thinking that this man is probably mentally ill or something, and then I better stop looking out the window again. A clever thing I do, I tell myself. The man's behavior, although redundant and pathetic, nonetheless strikes me as being ominous and frightening. The night goes on with that feeling that even if I'm probably safe inside a room, there is this disturbed man missing a few cogs who's got nothing to lose outside the room, that behaves as if he wants nothing good for me. As far as I know, he could be leaning right on the window glass a few minutes from now if this keeps going. Would he be grinning or not? Would he raise his arm to gently tap on the window while kneeling under the windowsill? I try not to think about it. I sleep uneasily that night. The following morning, not wanting to go outside of the room, I decide to stay in with my brother while my father goes to the lobby to fetch orange juice at breakfast and to speak to the clerk about the man outside. My father comes back after a couple of minutes with our breakfast and tells me that the clerk told him that the guy who frightened me the night before is known in the area for his mental illnesses. He's probably a schizophrenic, is what the guy said to my father. My dad then reassures me that the clerk told him the man is not dangerous and that we're safe staying there for another couple of nights. Luckily, I never see the man again for the duration of our stay there. Fast forward a couple of years. My father and I are reminiscing about our trip to California and especially those days in Santa Barbara. When the mentally ill man threatening me with his finger outside of our room is mentioned in the conversation, my father, as if relieved from not having to keep this thing secret anymore, let out that the morning after that dreadful night, the clerk had told him in fact to be careful with the man. He had told me that he was in fact dangerous. My dad just didn't want to scare us telling us the truth. I thanked him for lying to me that morning, and we agreed that luckily, we never saw the man again during our stay there. This primarily happened to my mom, but this has badly affected me mentally too with worry. She wanted me to post this just to give people a heads up that you can encounter creeps literally anywhere. This is going to be a long-winded story, sorry, but I just wanted to get in every detail possible. This happened last month and we still don't actually know what happened with Jeremy in the end. I'm a 19-year-old female who is studying in a university in England. Entering my second year last month, we decided to stay in my university town the day before I was due to move in my student home, so I could get there early and move my stuff in and give me the rest of the day to relax before we started Freshers Week. The night before moving day, me and my mother stayed in a hotel located in my university town. We were greeted by a friendly man called Jeremy. Jeremy was very attentive and showed us to our room, and stayed around 10 minutes telling us the history of the hotel, and repeatedly asked us if we needed help unpacking and stuff, which we kindly rejected. It was a Friday, so me and my mother went around the town and had a few drinks. Nothing too heavy, as Freshers Week started the next day, so I wanted to be fresh for the Saturday night. Before going out, Jeremy explained that he never works weekends, so he told us to have a good night, and wished me luck with the rest of my university journey. He gave me a hug and gave my mother a hug, and a slight kiss while moving his hand down towards her bum, which she found weird but brushed it off as nothing. My mom is 37 but looks young for her age, and Jeremy is easily in his 40s, so we just thought Jeremy may have fancied his chances with her. Moving on, me and my mom have a great night around the town, and watch a couple of live bands and have a few wines, so we are a little on the tipsy side. We get back to the hotel and the bar is still open, so we decide to have a nightcap. While we are having a drink at the bar, Jeremy emerges from a back room and spots us and makes a couple of jokes. Jeremy then proceeds to watch a video on his phone on full volume of a woman screaming at the top of her lungs as she was being murdered. The screaming was blood-curdling and made me and my mom unsettled, and also another couple in the bar looked a little concerned as well. The video went on for 3 or 4 minutes before Jeremy laughed and went into the back. When we make our way to bed, my mom had taken her shoes off after they had become painful after dancing in the bars earlier. Jeremy emerges from the back room and puts his arm around my mom and says, "Oh, let me help you to your room, honey. You must be wasted after all that drinking." My mom isn't actually that drunk and insists that she's fine, but Jeremy persists and basically follows us to our room and proceeds to come in. But I bid him goodnight and closed the door pretty much in his face before locking it. The next morning, we are up early and make our way down for breakfast. The young girl working takes our breakfast order, only for Jeremy to bring them out, insisting the eggs were cooked to perfection, although he claimed he never worked weekends. Me and my mom are weirded out by Jeremy at this point and check out straight after breakfast. Jeremy sees us out and says these exact words: "I'll be seeing you very soon, Christy." My mother's name. Anyway, at the time, it didn't strike us as unusual, and my mom drives us to my new home and helps me unpack and stuff. She helps me to unpack and then leaves in the early afternoon, as she had to work that evening in our local bar. The rest of the day goes by without much going on, but that night I'm out drinking with my housemates and I get a call from my mom saying that Jeremy had just come into the bar that she works at. This is no coincidence, as when we were having our nightcap, Jeremy would have heard us talking about the bar where my mom works, and he also had our address, which needed to be provided at the hotel for whatever reason. He had also said to my mom when she was pouring his pint that she would go around to his friend's house after his shift, which was just around the corner. This call really scared the crap out of me. About half an hour later, my mom called me and said that Jeremy had left the bar after she rejected his offer to go to his friend's house later, but Jeremy had said he'd be back for her later. This was really worrying, and I told her to make sure a customer was with her, as she was locking up on her own that evening. After this call, I felt sick and didn't join my friends in going to the nightclubs. In the meantime, I called my dad, who no longer speaks to my mom. They aren't on bad terms, they just chose not to keep in contact with each other after they split a few years ago. My dad is a club bouncer, but he wasn't on duty that night. But I called him and begged him to just drive down there and make sure everything was okay. My dad clearly knew by my shaky voice that I was panicked, scared, and helpless. 1 a.m. rolled around and I didn't get a response from either my mom or my dad's phone. I was worried sick and hoped that Jeremy hadn't been waiting around the corner and done something to my mom when she was locking up. At 1:30 a.m., my mom finally rang me in hysterics. As she had been locking up, Jeremy had pulled up in a car with 3 other men and shouted for her to get in for a ride. My mom declined his advances and he got out of the car and approached her and told her that he wouldn't tell her again. He said that she had been flirting and teasing him ever since she had checked in last night. She told Jeremy that was complete BS and she wasn't into him at all. As Jeremy got closer to her, she could smell heavy liquor. As Jeremy went to grab my mom, my dad pulls up behind the car and beeps his horn. This causes Jeremy to go back to the car and climb back in, and tells my mom that he knows where she lives and that he'll be waiting. The car screeches off. My dad then gets out of his car and tells her that I told him to check on her. Scared to go home alone, she asked my dad to drop her off at my grandparents as she didn't want to be alone. After that night, we never saw Jeremy again, but my mom did make a report to the police about him and gave them a full account of what had happened, but she hasn't heard back from them. I'm just so relieved that my dad turned up to the pub when he did, as Jeremy would have been able to easily get my mom into that car, as she is only very small in stature, 5'2" and around 120 pounds. I just hope that scumbag got what was coming to him and is behind bars. My mom has been pretty badly affected by this and is only now comfortable being alone in her house. So Jeremy, I hope you rot in hell, and let's never ever meet again. Precursor. I've aged since then. I do not fall for these tricks as easily as I did then. I still hope for the good in people, but I usually doubt it's there for a while. I went to beauty school just after high school, so I was learning what it was like to be an adult, work, go to school, and socialize all at the same time. If you've ever gone to beauty school, you know the hours are pretty lengthy, and it's a lot of work in a short amount of time. You also know that you're mostly crammed with a lot of women of different ages and a few boys. If you're a straight man in the school, and he's even mildly attractive, obviously considering you're attracted to that type of person, Most women in school are just so at awe because it's the only male person we are seeing during most of our weeks. That takes me to Dave, a few years older than me, tall, drives a Ducati to school, mysterious and handsome. Every girl was always putting on a little extra makeup, turning their hips towards him, flirting when he was around. He was cute, quiet, and always knew what to say. I wasn't as interested in catching his eye till he randomly asked me to meet up with him for a bite one day after school. I was single, needed to experience dating for the first time, and he didn't seem that bad to hang out with. Things started off pretty sweet and genuine. He had sent goodnight texts, jokes with me at school, and even genuinely seemed like he wanted to hang out more and more. We would go to bars and he knew everyone, so I could just get right in. I was underage at the time. We would go to eat, see shows, two-step, drink. I felt like I was starting to feel like an adult, enjoying the life and being wooed by a handsome, slightly older man. We would drive around on his bike. He would take me to nice, quiet dinners, always offered to pay, and even did little things like hold his arm when I walked downstairs or off a curb. I've never experienced this type of gentleman before. But as quickly as these sweet dates came, so did a very weird, calculated, and controlling behavior. He would start to ask why I didn't smile with my teeth. Was it because I was embarrassed of myself? He would sit behind me working at school and taunt me about how slow I was. He would say things like, "Don't sit like that," or say things that way. "That's not what ladies do, and I'm a lady, right? Don't wear that lipstick, it's trashy." But I guessed maybe I was being inappropriate. Maybe he's right. I should act more like an adult than a child. Be better at school. Look more like an adult. He brought me to his house one night, a place that he rented a room from. Suddenly, this stoic, Edward Cullen type turned into a person I didn't recognize, outside of the random mood shift. His room was filled with clothing and garbage, like old Gatorade bottles filling the floors. There was a TV and a bed. Of all the things I could really make out in this room. He brushed dirt off of his bed for me to sit down. We hung out for a while and he oddly confessed he never brushes his teeth. Okay, well, looking in this room, I could believe that. He also mentioned that he just bought new clothes when he needed them, and never washed the dirty ones, he just left them there. This was all in the first 2 to 3 weeks. Kind of a red flag if you ask me. The lights were off at one point, and we were watching a TV show. I see a light like a cell phone right outside the window behind the TV. I jump in and get his attention, but he had to have seen. He brushes it off, saying that it might just be his roommate, though I noticed he's texting someone at the same time. I let it go for the night, eventually go home, but still feel uncomfortable. Then the phone calls started happening and these stories of his ex. They lived together. She was 10 years older than him and had a 6-year-old kid. She was crazy. If he and I would hang out, I would suddenly start getting calls from an unknown number the minute that I walked to my door. They would ring till my voicemail got them, and no one would say a word till the message ran out of time. They would happen every 10 minutes for 3 hours or so. I asked him about this, if it was him, and he said that it may just be his crazy ex. But how would she have my number? He would say, well, I had to give her some of her things and she stole my phone at one point and must have taken your number. Still, the gentlemanly dates would happen. And the gifts, oh the gifts. Sending roses and coffee to my work. Showing up with massage and spa packages every week. We still saw each other at beauty school almost daily. And he would be kind, but it was always hush-hush until it was outside of school. I was torn. Is this person lying? Or is this the first kind person to want to date me? Maybe he just had some flaws and did crazy acts. And then the texts and Facebook messages started coming, clarifying it was her. He's told me about your messed up life and secrets that you've told him. I know he just saw you. I know you were just at his house. I was outside the window looking in. Your red dress was nice. He laughs about you. Poor you, just a little girl. And crap like that over and over. I would block her then, and she would have friends send me the same BS. She freaked me out and he always denied it and apologized for her behavior. And then there were days he wouldn't show up for school and she would text me during the day saying they were together, sending pictures of him. I tried to confront him, but he would always deny having anything to do with her, and repeating that she wanted to ruin his life. And then she started going to my work, telling my coworkers she was my friend and would color things on kids' menus like Boy Slayer 666, plus Dave heart her, and tell them that she wanted me to have it. She would send me a random picture of him in a booth at my work, and I would put the pieces together when I got there and got her notes, asking my coworkers where she was sitting and what she looked like. It was gross and embarrassing, let alone scary. My car was broken into at school and nothing was taken from it but a bill that had my address on it. I was then so scared. I could come out at any point in time and she would start calling over and over as soon as I closed the door behind me. I felt trapped. She would call my work and school saying that she was my mom and try to get more info on me, or call them as a customer trying to get me fired. My roommates finally kicked me out because they were rightfully frightened, so I turned to the police. They put me in contact with a detective who I handed all the calls, texts, and messages plus notes that she left at my work. I never answered the phone or responded to a single message from her. I had hundreds of calls, text for at least a month. They came in every day from the same number. I never blocked that number after the first few were blocked, so I could keep a log of all the attempts. Plus, I kept a journal of every incident leading up to me calling the police, just in case. I watch a lot of crime docs. He told me that there was nothing he could do to trace the number back to a specific person. And since she hadn't threatened my physical safety, his hands were tied. The very next day he calls me and is furious, telling me he can't help me if I'm harassing her back. I was confused, and when I asked what the heck he meant, he said, "You're calling a mother non-stop throughout the night, terrifying her and her kid." Because I was the 20-year-old and she was 36. Of course he's going to believe the adult, but I never called her. He asked me to come to his office to show me his evidence he has against me. And she forwarded him tons of texts saying things like, "I hope that she loses her kid," and I just broke down. I would never say something like that to someone. And I know I didn't send these tens of texts especially overnight when I had school the next day. But he didn't believe me and he dismissed me. He ultimately turned against me and was now on her side. This was crushing. I broke things off for good with Dave, basically told him to leave me alone. We still had to go to school together and he was a complete dick. I embarrassed myself in front of my friends at defending him so long. My work, my school, who I had to beg to make sure this girl didn't come around again. And a detective who ultimately didn't believe a word I said, just to get some peace. My friends were tired of seeing me, scared, stressed, and constantly talking about this weird situation happening to me. I was over it all. She finally left me alone once I moved, got a new car, a new phone, and deleted social media. But it still freaks me out to this day that we all live in the same town. She messaged me a few years ago from a different account when I was back on social media and said she was sorry, that she was manipulated by Dave, and that they did this to many girls. This was disturbing and gut-wrenching to me. Did a mother of a 6-year-old really have nothing better to do than play messed up games with a sociopath? Maybe two sociopaths together, I guess. I don't know. Dave and your ex, let's not ever meet again. I just want to start off by saying that, to make this story easier to understand, I'm going to use a lot of dialogue. Obviously, this wasn't recorded, so these aren't the exact words of anyone involved in this experience. I'm just trying to tell it as best as possible, and I think that it'll benefit me and you if I use a lot of quotes. Just keep in mind, most of it is not direct. This will be a long one, so let's get into it. This happened in 2015, when I was 16 and still living in my hometown. A forgotten little beach town in the middle of nowhere that's so remote, it's probably not even known by surrounding areas. Basically, there's 3 things you can do there as a teenager. Go to the movies, swim, or go to this pathetic little place called Miller's Fun Park. It's relatively similar to a lot of fun park type things, only a whole lot worse. There's a crappy arcade with broken skee-ball machines, batting cages that probably haven't been used since the early 80s, a pathetic mini golf course, and the most dangerous go-karts you've probably ever seen in your life. Seriously. Miller's Fun Park is on the edge of a field. On the opposite side of the field, about 3 miles down, is the beach, and across the single street are woods. If our town is in the middle of nowhere, Miller's is practically on the moon. Anyway, getting into the story. My cousin Emma and I decided one summer night that we wanted to go go-karting. It was around 10 p.m., so we knew it would be almost deserted, but that was the way that we liked it. I picked her up from my house and we made the long drive down. Once we had arrived and parked in the nearly empty lot, we hopped out of the car and paid for some go-karting tickets. The same people had worked there forever, I swear to God. There was no one there except for a few boys in the arcade, and a guy who looked to be in his 60s sitting on a beach near the batting cages. Emma and I paid him no mind, and went to the go-kart track. Like I said, these karts were incredibly dangerous, so I was focused on nothing but making sure I wasn't going to skid and flip as we raced way too fast around the windy track. This is why I didn't notice the guy walking over to the fence, and why I didn't notice him watching us until we pulled into the lanes after our last lap. He was standing on the other side of the fence, right where I parked. He stared at me with the most unsettling expression, a creepy smile playing on his cracked lips as his dark eyes gleamed. I managed an uneasy smile back, handed another ticket to the guy running the go-karts, who was obviously higher than a kite, and Emma and I went off again. This time I couldn't focus. This dude gave me the worst type of feeling. My eyes were constantly finding their way to the metal fence where he stood, unmoving and watching us every time we were in his view. And the thing that was bothering me the most was that we only had bought 3 tickets. We were on our second to last run and he was standing directly next to the exit gate. I was just praying that he would move before we were done. But of course, no such luck. Our last go came and went, and I had no choice but to pull in next to him, unbuckle my seatbelt, and get out of my go-kart. I glanced over at Emma a few feet away as I opened the exit gate to see if she was as scared as I was, but she didn't seem to notice as she bounced over and bragged about how she had beat me the last 2 times. I was barely listening. I opened the gate and the guy stepped in front of me just as I was leaving. "Hey there," he said. His voice was dry and he smelled of cigarettes. "What are you cute girls doing all alone here?" My eyes darted over to Emma, who was looking at the dude with both confusion and annoyance. What?" she said. pushing past the gate so she stood beside me. "It's so late." His tone was as hungry as his eyes, and he reminded me of a snake. "Do your parents know that you're out?" "Yes," I answered quickly. "They're waiting for us, actually. We need to get going." This was a lie, and it probably sounded like it from my tone, but I tried to push past him anyway. It didn't work. He grabbed my shoulder to keep me in front of him. "Nonsense. I saw you girls pull up alone." My heart dropped in my stomach. He had? "Are you heading out? Why don't I walk you to your car?" He starts inching towards me, and I looked to Emma for help. With one swift motion, she pulled me halfway behind her and started sizing the guy up. This was pretty dumb as we were both small, and though she is a few inches taller than me, neither of us are anywhere near his size. This guy clears a 6'2" easy, but she doesn't seem to care. "Actually, we're just headed to the arcade," she says harshly. "Her boyfriend is going to meet us here." I did have a boyfriend at the time, but he wasn't coming. He wasn't even in town. I knew she knew this. The guy's face immediately changes. His smile disappeared, and he was now glaring down at me with a look of annoyance in his eyes. I felt myself start to cower. "Boyfriend," he says roughly. Emma didn't give me time to say anything. She grabbed my arm and tugged me behind her into the arcade. The boys from before had already left, and the usual girl who worked in there was nowhere to be found. But still, it felt safer than outside. We ran to the back and we hid by the claw machine. "What the hell do we do? I left my phone in the car," I whisper shouted. There was no way I was going out there alone, and that pothead go-kart guy had already disappeared into the small ticket shack. "I don't have mine either. I left it charging," she said, facepalming. "We're just gonna have to make a run for it." "Are you crazy? He's probably waiting for us in the parking lot." "What about the guy who runs the go-karts? We could get him to walk us out," she said. I just shook my head. "He's high as Mount Everest right now. I don't want to risk running all the way to the ticket stand for nothing." "Then we have no choice." She stood up, pulling me with her. "Let's go." I swallowed hard, wanting to cry. I'd never been that scared before. There was something so wrong about that guy. We made our way out of the arcade, looking around to see if he's nearby. The park was now absolutely deserted. Emma practically had to drag me to the exit. I was looking every direction every second, waiting for a guy to come out of the woods or something and pounce on us at any second. But he didn't. Everything was still. "Get your keys out," Emma instructed, and I pulled them from my pocket. We were about 20 feet from my car when I stopped dead in my tracks. "What?" she whispered. I stared at the car, keys in hand. I never locked it. "I never locked the car, Emma." "What?" "I didn't lock it. What if?" I trailed off, but she knew what I was saying. She started inching towards the car, and I grabbed her arm to stop her, but she pulled away. "I'm just gonna peek. If I say run, you run." Her voice is quiet. I nodded shakily. She eventually made it close enough to see inside, but by the way she was squinting, I knew it was too dark to make anything out. My heart was beating out of my chest. What if he's in there? What if he jumps out, or what if we get in and he asphyxiates me like in the movies? All these thoughts almost drown out the unmistakable sound of shoes slamming against the pavement. My head whipped around instantly, and there he was, sprinting at us at full speed out of the woods. I screamed bloody murder, and I broke for the car, jiggling the handle as I realized that I had locked it. Emma was already on the other side, screaming at me to unlock it. I fumbled with the keys but managed not to drop them as I unlocked the door, flung it open, and practically threw myself inside. I just managed to close the door when he was there, slamming his fist against the window and shouting incoherently. I was sobbing at this point, and I barely manage to lock the doors as he goes for the handle and yanks on it as hard as he can. Emma was screaming at me to go, and through my tears, I shoved the key into the ignition and I flew into reverse. He was still chasing us and yelling as I veered backwards out of the lot and turned as fast as I could while slamming on the gas. I was driving like I was still in a go-kart, but I didn't care. I could barely see the road through the flood of tears, and Emma had to grab the wheel several times to keep us from crashing before I regained some composure. Though obviously shaken up, she had managed to keep her tears in and be the sane one out of the two of us, as we drove at least 30 miles over the speed limit the whole way back to my house. We didn't tell either of our parents about this, and looking back, I wish we had because there was something seriously wrong with this guy. But we were too scared of what they might say or do. I think we thought that they would blame us somehow. So, it stayed a secret between us. Something even we didn't talk about until months after the horrifying encounter. It's safe to say, we never went back to Miller's Fun Park after that. I'm quarantined with my mom. We're both avoiding going out when possible because we're both compromised, so we just take short trips for any errands we need to complete in order to not go stir crazy. Today, she needed to get gas and we needed a few groceries, so we both went. We saw my cousin at the gas station, and after I went to one of the pumps, I said hello while my mom went to pay for her gas. After she paid, I started pumping the gas and we all stood there chatting for a moment. When my cousin returned to the car, a man came out of the gas station. He was balding, unkempt, a patchy short beard and old glasses, the kind you see in high school photos from the 80s. He was wearing a sort of tropical shirt with a notepad and pen in the pocket, and dirty khakis and a tan jacket. He stopped at my cousin's car and talked to her. She's kind of small, so I stood there watching until she got in her car safely and I had heard it start. My mom and I were pumping the last bit of gas into the car. Both of us didn't need to do it, but we were both just glad to be outside for a moment. The guy walked to us while she was finishing up and said, "Are you having fun?" We just kind of glanced at each other and my mom said, "Uh-huh," and squatted me to make me go to the side of the car. I didn't go. I didn't want to until she was in the car herself. The guy then turned to me and said, "Are you having fun with your granddaughter?" As if he were trying to make a joke, but his facial expression never changed. I just kind of gave him a blank stare and said, "That's my mom." I squeezed between him and the bumper and moved to my side of the car. He followed closely and said, "I just came here from Michigan. I've been here for 10 years. I got in and I held onto my door. He stared at where I was holding the door and then at my face again. I was giving him that blank stare and said, "That's nice." My dog stuck his nose out and began barking at this guy. He's a 15-pound Yorkie and usually sweet, but sounded like an angry guard dog while he was barking this time. "Is the dog having fun?" the guy asked. I held onto the door tighter and said, "I guess so. Have a nice day." I closed the door quickly, locked it, and my mom drove off. My cousin drove after us. She had been watching the entire time, waiting for either us or the guy to leave. My mom and I both remarked that the guy was creepy, and we thought that he might try to jump in the car. I'm glad that I went with her today. This happened around 10 years ago in the south of the UK. For reference, I'm a 28-year-old male, and at the time, I was working part-time at a fuel station. It was on an A road which linked into a small village to a ring road into the nearby city. The village itself was quiet, high-end, and extremely expensive to live in. It was the sort of place that only had one chain store, and it was a Waitrose. Everything else was either boutiques or privately owned gourmet groceries. So, as someone who has always enjoyed cars, it was always fun to see what kind of high-end luxury sports cars would adorn the forecourt on any given day. This is where I met Michael. Michael was in his late 40s, dark hair, well dressed. Always wore gaunt or Ralph Lauren, or on his workdays tailored canali suits and so on. He was an all-around nice guy, exceptionally polite, which was actually a rarity as most of the residents of the surrounding areas seemed to despise anyone who didn't qualify for the additional tax bracket. We got chatting about his collection of vehicles or the watches that he wore. He would always show up wearing some kind of Rolex and driving his Aston Martin, Range Rover, or Porsche, so there was always a lot to talk about. I got to know that he worked in finance, and the conversation got onto what I was planning to do with my life, also to work in finance. And we would always have these pleasant conversations until I left that part-time job in favor of taking up an apprenticeship role at my uncle's brokerage. Michael is important, and we'll get to why shortly. Something to be known about my uncle is that he's a man with a lot of fingers and a lot of pies, literally. As well as his brokerage and property portfolio, he also owned a few takeaways for cash flow purposes. I think we all know what that means. And as such, I would occasionally step in as a delivery driver when a driver would let him down. Luckily, my uncle also lived in the previously mentioned village, and the main pizza place he owned catered to the residents of said village. So, tips were usually quite decent, and my uncle would usually throw me a few quid for helping out. Fast forward to the summer of 2018, and I had been roped into dropping off a few pies at a property on an extremely prestigious road. Average house price well above 1.4 million, and I'm intrigued to actually get close enough to see what these houses actually look like, as they're all gated and set far back from the road behind a shroud of trees and shrubs. So, I find the place and I buzz the intercom, when a voice comes back sort of muffled just saying, "Yes?" So I answer with the names of the takeaway, and the gates slowly open and I make my way up the driveway to a very large mock Georgian home, complete with detached 4-car garage, and that's when I see Michael's number plates. He had his initials for his cars with the numbers 1, 2, and 3, and it was the same for his wife. I was interested to see up close the sort of life this guy had, if I'm completely honest, especially as a young aspiring financier. I exited my car, brought out the pizzas, and the double doors opened, and that's when I saw an unfamiliar face looking back at me. It was a man, early 20s maybe, thin and shaved head. I can remember he was wearing no shirt and some scruffy jeans and trainers. He was also holding something behind his back. "Hey, bring the pizzas through to the kitchen." I can remember his voice being hoarse and barely audible, and with an accent I had never heard before. Nervously, I said nothing and just looked at him, which made him visibly angry. "Bring the pizza through," he repeated, more aggressive this time, and I finally responded. "Where's Michael? This is Michael's place, right?" And it is completely true that in situations like this, your mouth goes completely dry and to always follow your gut. This guy was setting off alarm bells and telling every fiber of my being to just get off the property. Unfortunately, this is when it dawned upon me that it's a gated property and I was locked in. This is when things went from bad to worse. I can remember the terror swelling up inside of me when he moved his hand in front of him to show me a large kitchen knife, and he uttered the words, "Run." I dropped the pizza onto the gravel, left my car, and decided that I would have a better chance of survival by running down the driveway and lifting myself over the gates. They were the wooden type which had no decorative spears atop them, luckily, but all the while, I could hear his feet crunching onto the gravel behind me. I didn't look back, and I managed to pull myself up and over the gates, and hurling myself onto the pavement below me. The adrenaline in my system still had me running for what seemed like hours, but was perhaps 10 minutes at most, until I was a good few streets away and I decided to call the police. The police met me at the park that I was hiding at. One officer stayed with me, and the other proceeded to the property along with another patrol car. At first, I got the distinct impression that they didn't believe me, or thought that I was up to something. But after my uncle arrived to pick me up and vouch for me being sent there to deliver pizza, the PC in question backed down. Upon their arrival at the property, they found nothing, just my car with slashed tires and broken windows, alongside feces being smeared across part of the kitchen. There was food strewn about the place and also a needle found in one of the bathrooms, but no sign of the man who threatened me. Michael and his family at the time were visiting family in Australia, I later found out. I never did go back for another shift at the pizza place, and although I understand this may not be the most crazy or horrifying encounter, it's something that's always stuck with me. Wealth and apparent financial security is just complete illusory. People are people, and there are some sick and tormented people out there who will always find a way to carry out their twisted actions. If anything, I've had more encounters with crazy people since moving away from my council estate roots and into suburbia. When I was 18, I was living in a small town. I was friends with the ratty skaters around and helped connect with this dude who sold weed. He was 29 at the time, I think, and he gave me pretty good deals and he lived nearby. I wasn't driving at the time, so this was convenient for me. His name was Max. Max always struck me as a weird dude, but I honestly quite liked his weirdness. Not in a romantic way or anything, but I like weird people. We had normal weed buying interactions that never lasted more than 10 minutes. Buy some weed, maybe smoke a bowl, and that's it. He would often tell me that he would drop it off at my house, but I never let him because, as I said before, he was weird. I wasn't afraid of him, but was definitely aware that he and his offers to deliver were weird. One day in May 2018, I was invited to a bonfire by some ratty skaters that introduced me to this guy. I had no idea that he had been there, nor was it important to me at all. I brought the guy that I was dating at the time. I said hey to everyone, including Max. We stayed for a couple of hours and some of them played some music on their guitars. Nearing the time that I was leaving the bonfire around 11 p.m., Max was getting upset about something and he threw his guitar in the bonfire. I didn't know what he was so angry or upset about, and I paid no mind to it. This happened as I was leaving with the guy that I was dating. I went to bed and I woke up to paragraphs on paragraphs of crazy text from Max, ranging from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Like a constant stream of text, stating things such as, "You know how much I loved you. You're cruel." He would go back and forth between saying, "I would give you the world if you let me," and "You really do deserve him though." He said really scary things like, "You are a predator and should be snubbed out. Just wait, winky face." And, "You are stuck. I will either love you or hate you to the fullest extent my powers behold. Right now, I pay the worst death on you and your frickin' boyfriend." And to top it all off, he said, "Losing you is like losing a mother to me." And he told me to tell him I never loved him and that I wouldn't hear from him again if I did. So that's what I did. I said, "I never loved you. Don't message me again." And I left it at that. I didn't get a response, nor did I care to get one. Max had never expressed any romantic interest, asked me out or anything. This was all out of nowhere and he was 11 years older than me. I was barely 18. That night, he cut his long hair off and posted photos naked on Facebook, curled up in the fetal position talking about being a statue of shame. It's as if he had had a breakdown. But I had no intention of causing that, and I didn't think I would even offend anyone by bringing the guy that I was seeing. Everybody else seemed to like the guy that I brought. About a week later, Max texted me pretty late at night and asked if I had seen the flowers that he spread along my sidewalk, saying that he stole every flower in the vicinity of my neighborhood that night. I asked how he knew where I lived, and said that I hadn't seen the flowers, so he must have had the wrong house. I also told him that he shouldn't do that, as I never felt anything for him, and so on. He told me that he had heard that I lived on the same block as another one of the skater guys that we were both friends with, and he wasn't wrong. The skater guy that I lived by was on the other side of the block, and I never walked that way, so I never saw the flowers. I blocked his number and I didn't hear from him again for weeks. Weeks later, I woke up after a rough night, and there were loads of flowers on the sidewalk right outside my house, along with a little bouquet at the top of my walkway. I was pissed. I wasn't scared yet, and stupidly, I unblocked his number and texted him asking why the hell there were flowers outside of my house. This confirmed that this indeed was where I lived. I still to this day feel so stupid for texting him and making it known that after weeks he had found my house. He responded saying, sounds nice. 'Twas me. I bitched him out basically, and I blocked his number again. About a week later, I was out of town and my roommate texted me a photo of a heart with a peace sign inside of it and my name written under it, drawn in chalk outside our house. When I got back into town, I went to the courthouse and began a process of getting a stalking order against him. When I left the courthouse, I went to Max's work and told him that he needed to stop this behavior and that he was stalking me. He looked me in the eyes with no facial expression and said, "If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops." I got angry and said loudly, "Call the cops. I was just talking to them about you." And I left his work in a rage. Soon after this, I began driving my car again. I once drove by him and he noticed that it was me. The next day, I woke up to my car covered in flowers. I presented my case to the judge and she put the stalking order in place. He was served with it by police officers, and I thought that that was that, and he wouldn't be bothering me again. I was wrong. After the stalking order was served, he made several other chalk messages on my sidewalk, left random gifts for me like chalk, and beheaded my little pony heads on beer bottles. I always brought these things to the police station, but they said that I needed to catch him doing it, take a photo or get a security camera. So I got security cameras and I really hoped that I would catch him. It turned out that my camera was stupid, and I couldn't just watch the videos it took but had to skip through second by hand. It was an impossible task. I was terrified of leaving my house at night at this point. I never had my curtains open anymore, and I was so frustrated that my livelihood was being taken away from me. Ultimately, I unblocked his number in hopes that he would text me directly violating the stalking order, and after a few days, it worked. He sent me a weird text saying something like, "Forgive me. We are charming, this is harming. Let us try again." By now, it's September 2019, and he finally goes to jail. He's facing up to a year and has to stay there until our court date. I finally start calming down. I'm able to go outside at night, even if it's just to get in my car. I let myself have my curtains open sometimes. I'm starting to feel alive again. Right when I start feeling secure in my small town life again, someone posted bail, and he was released after only 3 months in jail, and I went back to living in fear. We still had court dates coming up, and I was optimistic that he would serve more time for ruining my life for so long. His lawyer kept pushing the court date back to gather evidence, and after about 6 months of pushing it back, the state decided that he wouldn't do anything more and they closed the case basically. I had moved out of town 3 hours away at this point, so he didn't actually have an option to continue this behavior. Living in this new place, I feel safe. I can walk at night. I don't have to have my curtains closed all the time. It's been over a year since they decided to close the case. About a month ago, he began responding to my friends' Instagram stories, friends that live here in this new town, telling them how fond he is of me and so on. I've always had him blocked, but my Instagram isn't private, so he must have found him that way. I have since changed my account to private and he hasn't messaged any more friends of mine. I refuse to be fearful now, the way that I was then. He will never find where I live or where I work now. However, my life is forever changed after this experience. I will always be more aware of people and their weird energy. I will always close my curtains early in the evening and make sure all the windows and doors are locked. I will always live a little bit in fear. Maybe not of him, but of it happening again. He ruined my life for a year, and I really wish that he would have had to serve that time in jail. He deserves it. So I live in an apartment complex right next to a 7-Eleven. Literally a 2-minute walk from my door. So, since all this quarantine lockdown mess, I've been staying up later than usual till maybe 2 or 3 in the morning most nights. So last night, a little bit after 12, I had a taste for some chips and decided that I would go across the street to 7-Eleven, which I go to regularly. So I make my way over, and on my way in, I had to pass this man who was browsing on the Redbox kiosk. I don't think much of it. I go inside, get some snacks, pay, and then head out of the door. As I'm coming out, the Redbox man is literally staring dead at me with these scarily bright, light blue eyes. But not wanting to freak myself out even more, I say to myself, maybe he's zoned out or in deep thought. I wander into La La Land myself, sometimes so by thinking that. I was trying to make myself more comfortable having to walk past this strange man. So I'm headed back into my apartment complex, which on this side of the street has a creaky gate door. I realized that as I was walking, I never heard it slam behind me like I always have before. I look back and the man is right behind me. Not close up on me, but still, definitely following. Once again, trying to ease my mind, I'm thinking that he must be going home. But I also noticed that he didn't have any disc in his hand. For as much as he was at the kiosk the whole time I was in the store, taking my sweet, indecisive time. So not wanting to come off as scared, I keep my same pace. But I probably should have sprinted because, man, forget being nice. Anyways, I'm literally just a few steps away from my door, which is upstairs, and the man randomly calls out to me, "Hey, do you have a lighter?" Out of instinct, I turned my head to the fact I knew someone was speaking to me and responded, "No, I don't, sorry." I didn't want to go up my stairs because I didn't want to let this man know exactly which apartment that I lived in. So I was planning on walking around until I lost him. But he asked me another question. "Could I use your bathroom?" I tell him, "No, sorry, my roommates probably wouldn't be comfortable with me letting someone in this late. I don't have roommates, but I dang sure didn't want this man getting any ideas thinking that I was by myself." I keep walking, but this man was still following me. I simply ask, "Do you live around here?" And he tells me, "I have a buddy that does and he was supposed to meet me across the way there, but maybe he fell asleep or something." I've never been here before, but I do know his door is at number 201. Could you help me find it? 201 is my door, plus, if you had a friend that lives over here, why are you asking to use my bathroom? I knew this man was lying and up to something. I quickly came up with 201. That should be right past the pool right next to the laundry area. My friends are waiting for me, so I should get going. My gut told me to head to my car though, because what if he watched where I was going and decided to give me a surprise later on? No, I watch too many movies and read too many scary stories uploaded on here. So I started heading towards the parking lot. Not running, but definitely walking quicker than before, when I realized the man is chasing me at this point. I hurry up and pull my keys out of my pocket, and get in my car and immediately lock the doors. The man starts pounding on my driver's side window telling me to open the door. I can't help but focus on those creepy blue eyes, but I also notice that he was reaching for his pocket. I start up my car before I can see what he was going to pull out. I heard a pop, but I didn't give a crap at that moment, as long as I could get the heck out of his presence. I drove maybe 5 minutes down the street to this Arco gas station and called the police. Waiting on the police to arrive, I noticed what the popping sound was. This wacko had popped my back tire with probably a switchblade. Of course, when the police arrived and went to check the area, the random guy was gone. They did question the 7-Eleven clerk, and he let them know that the man had been up there a few times since last week, and never has been a problem but is obviously homeless. I'm still shook up about what went on last night, and I'm going to chill on the late night trips to 7-Eleven for a little bit. To the messed up Redbox man, let's not meet again. But if we do, I have a taser for you on its way from Amazon. Try me. It was probably only after my close call that my mind really started to run away with what could have happened were it not for my dog. I'm a 26-year-old female. I live with my fiance and my 2 cats and my dog, Rowan. Our house is literally less than a minute away from a huge farmer's field that is frequented by many dog walkers at all times of the day. Me and my significant other often take turns walking Rowan around the field throughout the day. It was only around 7:30 p.m. and it was still really bright and sunny. Rowan was letting me know that it was time to go for a walk, so while my partner was tinkering in the garage, I grabbed his leash and headed to the field. Let me quickly tell you about Rowan. He's a 2-year-old Rottweiler who is very loving and playful, if a little daft, but he wouldn't hurt a fly. There's not a bad bone in his body. He is also extremely well trained, and we made sure to put the effort in as he's a big dog breed with a bad rep, so we wanted to make a point of not feeding stereotypes. I'm very much of the opinion of there's no bad dogs, just bad owners. Unfortunately, we've had some run-ins with some not so good dog owners, so Rowan gets a little nervous when he meets new dogs and people, but we're working on it. Anyway, back to the story. We're walking around the farmer's field. Rowan is off sniffing and peeing on every blade of grass in sight. I always keep an eye out for other walkers anyway due to Rowan being a little nervous, and I clocked a guy on his own walking down the path towards me fairly far away. At first I thought nothing of it, as plenty of people walk this route without dogs. We were just kind of getting into lockdown in the UK though. As the guy got closer, I noticed he was in a full tracksuit with the hood up, which was odd because it was like 23 degrees, so shorts and t-shirt weather. He then took a small path off the field leading through some bushes. It was a public-made shortcut rather than an official public footpath, but it was well enough used, so I kept walking, thinking nothing of it. At about 15 meters away from the path he took, Rowan shot back to my side immediately, dropping the mouthful of dirt he had been pretending not to eat. He's not the brightest. I petted him and noticed that he was standing super alert, staring at the path entrance. When I looked up, I caught a glimpse of the man peeking around the edge of the bushes that had concealed the entrance. I stopped dead on my tracks and Rowan's fur was stood on end as he positioned himself in front of me. It took me a second to realize that this man had been watching and waiting in the bushes for me to approach. My current route would have meant that I would be walking right by the path's opening. My stomach dropped as I realized we were the only ones around on that field. I had this weird moment where I was almost trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, but then the guy whistled. Not a wolf whistle, but as if to try and get my dog to come to him. Rowan was having none of that though, and I definitely took it as my cue to trust my stranger danger instincts. I immediately turned and sped walked back the way that we came, while simultaneously pulling my phone out and dialing my partner's number. I ended up having to clip on Rowan's lead to get him to walk with me, and he was not taking his eyes away from the path. He was even growling a little, which was so out of character and put me on edge even more. I glanced back and the man had edged slightly out of the bushes, watching me walk away. My partner answered the phone after a few rings. I was only halfway through stammering out the story and he was already sprinting up to the field to meet me, telling me to stay on the phone but keep an eye on the man. The man in the tracksuit now fully came out of the bushes and just stood staring at me, walking away. I dared a quick look away from him towards the entrance to the field, to see my fiancé jogging towards me. He was relieved that I was okay, but was also immediately pointing and shouting, "Is that him?" Clearly furious at what this man might have had in mind, had Rowan not picked up on him hiding in the bushes. I eventually convinced my fiancé not to confront him, as he was still stood staring, almost taunting us. You never know what people might be capable of or have concealed. We came off the field and took Rowan on a different walk, which he was more than happy about. I'd never been so proud of Rowan for stepping up and protecting me. Safe to say, he got plenty of treats and fussing when we got home. So, creepy man in the bushes, let's not meet. I've had a stalker for over 2 years. I'm a 27-year-old female and have worked with people with disabilities since I was 19. I was born with a rare genetic condition and have been using my experience as a radical disability activist and advocate to help other people with disabilities in my community. During my time working in the disability community, I have been sexually harassed and assaulted several times by both men and women. When I first started working with the organization, I was working with my best friend's older brother, her older sister, and several of her aunts, uncles, and cousins. So in the beginning, I always felt safe. Like people would do anything to keep the creeps away from me. They would have. However, after several years, all my close friends slowly started leaving. Flash forward to a couple of years ago, when most of my closest friends were all gone, leaving me one of the most experienced and senior staff members, including all of the management and the board of directors. I've had a lot of bad experiences in these past 2 years, with the stuff stated above, but the worst part has been the lack of support from management. So, within the last few years, a client that we'll call Leonard, a male in his 50s, started to chat with me at community events. We often have parties or events that we invite the entire community to. From the very first moment that I met Leonard, I experienced chills creeping up and down my spine. Something about the way that he looked at me has always made me super uncomfortable, to the point that I'll do literally anything to get away from him, including helping folks in the bathroom. He's a really short white guy with shocking white hair and these clear blue eyes that are just empty. He's always really smiley and soft-spoken. He started off innocent enough. He would corner me at parties and talk until I found a reason to slip away. But at some point, he managed to get my personal cell phone number from a coworker, I still don't know who, and started calling me late at night and leaving long, rambling messages. I never answered the phone, and after a while, he stopped. He would still periodically call me though, despite me asking him politely in person to stop. He started cornering me in the office too, when no one was around, so I had a difficult time getting away from him. Every time that he cornered me, he would grab my arm or shoulder so I couldn't leave. More recently, like during the lockdown, he started calling the office and leaving messages on my work phone after hours. He wasn't even someone that I personally worked with. I asked my coworker who did work with him to please ask him to stop, and which she did. She spoke to him several times, but he would only ever stop for a week or two. And he always made a point to come and apologize directly to me, which almost always made me more uncomfortable. It started to get really bad about 3 weeks before I started working from home. He would forget his appointments, which were purposefully set on the one day in the week when I wasn't working in the office. He would come in the next day when he knew that I was working, and then he figured out when I got off, and would come in to meet with my coworker right before I got off work and to wait around until my shift ended. He started giving me little gifts, which I always refused. Every time he would get really offended, so then he started writing me poetry. Instead of just handing it to me, he would grab me and read over my shoulder and point out what every single line meant. I always tried to get other coworkers to help me, but no one saw anything as weird or bad or unsafe, despite the warning bells going off in my head. And then one day he cornered me and said he wanted to take me to the train station, because I usually walked. I asked him if he meant he wanted to walk me the 2 blocks. He shook his head and said, "No, I want to take you in my car so I can keep a better eye on you." It gave me instant chills. I told him no, but he kept insisting that it would happen before he finally left. I'm a tiny petite person, so the idea that he was following me long enough to know exactly which train station that I went to, and the line that I got on. There are several different lines going in several different directions, and even the direction that I was going really freaked me out. Enough to double up on the defensive measures I normally keep on me, including pepper spray and a taser. I told everyone. I told supervisors, HR, the associate director, everyone that I could think of. I had meetings with my direct supervisors where I explained everything that happened and why he was giving me the creeps. But they all just brushed me off, and one manager in particular said I was being too dramatic. He was just a sweet older man, doing nothing to harm anyone. Until the next time he came around. I told a couple of my coworkers, J and P, a 28-year-old male and a 26-year-old male, and they both agreed that one of them would always walk me out from now on. On cue, Leonard waited around until after I got off, but J and P, who said they had looked out for me, were both super busy, so the associate director said he would walk me out, still not believing that it was a big deal. We started walking and chatting like old friends, and the whole time, Leonard followed us. The associate director had to literally yell at him to finally get Leonard to leave. Right then, he finally realized how serious the situation was getting. The next day, one of the managers who was super rude and dismissive about the whole situation pulled me into her office and profusely apologized. After Leonard was yelled at and went back to the office, the manager had a conversation with him that really creeped her out on my behalf. Apparently he was saying things like, "My relationship with me is ours and has nothing to do with the organization. You have no right to tell me how to behave around me. She likes me and likes what I'm doing. I'm not making her uncomfortable. She needs me to watch out for her." That same day, the entire management team apologized for not taking immediate action. Especially since this is not the first time stuff like this has happened to me. I just asked that from now on, I have absolutely no contact with him. I reiterated several times that I absolutely do not want an apology. I want nothing. Since then, I've learned that Leonard has harassed and assaulted an old coworker who had to file a restraining order against him. This was told to me by the manager who originally dismissed my claims. She had dealt with the other situation, yet nothing was told to any of the other staff about this behavior. And not only that, she berated me in front of other staff for speaking out about my experience, saying that it wasn't that big of a deal, even though she knew he had done it before. If I never have to see that guy again, I will be eternally grateful. The situation was never fully resolved before lockdown. I'm very thankful I've been able to work from home, but I'm not sure how to proceed after restrictions are lifted, and I have to start going back out again. I was thinking about filing a restraining order. My husband and family really want me to, but I pretty much figured out that no one will take me seriously. This happened about 2 weeks ago. I was walking my dog on the normal route. Normally, I would be at 6th form studying my A-levels. However, as we all know, schools are closed. Due to the lockdown, the streets were very quiet. I was about 20 minutes from home when I clocked 2 men in a beaten-up blue van, driving past, staring and leering at me. Nothing too worrying, this happens a lot. However, I soon did start to worry. Obviously, the van is going to be going at a faster pace than me walking, so the van would drive, pause, wait for me to catch up and then drive a little bit ahead. Pause, wait for me to catch up, and it would keep repeating this. I thought perhaps they were looking for an address, but they seemed focused on me and my journey, and nobody was getting out of the van to do deliveries. I know the van that does the deliveries in this area, and this was not that van. I crossed the road so I was on the opposite side to the van in case they tried to grab me. I had a gut instinct they wanted to keep me within their sights while they worked up the courage and waited for the right opportunity to get me. While the van had gotten a few meters ahead, as they were waiting for me, and it was at an angle to their wing mirrors, they wouldn't see me, I ducked behind some hedges. Normally, I would have phoned my parents by this point. However, both of them are key workers and would not be able to leave their work. This left me at a vulnerable position, as I didn't want these 2 men knowing where I lived, where I was home alone. So I resisted the urge to sprint the last 5 minutes home. Me and my dog hid in the bushes for a while. The van drove past a few times and the men were peering out, but they didn't see me. I went home after I felt like they were gone, and thankfully they had. I checked the number plate when I got home, and I believe it was a fake as there were no matches. I am a 28-year-old male living in the Deep South. I am now a functional, medicated and therapy-attending paranoid schizophrenic. However, I wasn't always this way. And this story comes from a time before I ever even knew what was wrong. It was about April 2007 when this happened. I had just come out of a painful divorce and she had taken all of my friends away from me in the process. I was obviously trying to reach out to anyone I could, but I had severe codependency issues that I didn't know how to address. Anyway, I found myself wandering the game section of my local Walmart, as I'm still a gamer at heart, and had to see what was available. Things were going alright, and I seemed to be in control of myself. And then he appeared. This poor, unsuspecting soul started talking to me about World of Warcraft, which I happened to play. I perked up at this point, thinking I could make a friend. A new friend that hadn't been taken from me. We made casual jokes and talked about the new expansion. I can't remember if it had just come out or if it was soon to come. At this point, his mother, he was probably about 18 to 20, judging by his appearance, came by and took him to another aisle. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked off, and like that, our conversation was through. Well, in my mind, we had made a connection. We had bonded. In my sick, twisted state, I thought he would appreciate it if we hung out for a while. So I followed him. I made a point to casually stroll on the aisles that he happened to visit, and strike up conversations with him about different things, jokes, I can't remember. I could tell he was getting creeped out by the third time I had done this. He started getting this deer in the headlights look every time he saw me, and it was starting to become a horror story, though in my eyes it was perfectly natural. At some point, however, his fight or flight must have kicked in, because when I appeared, as soon as I opened my mouth to speak, he screamed, "Leave me alone," and stormed off, dragging his mother as quickly as he possibly could. This was a wake-up call for me, that I was being severely creepy and also a stalker. I realized that this could very well be the behavior that caused my divorce in the first place. I checked myself into a mental institution soon after and got the help that I needed. I am now significantly better, and my relationships with people have improved greatly. I now have good friends and a loving fiance. And not all creepers mean to be creepy. Some of us just need the proper psychiatric help. On behalf of all the unknowing and good-intentioned creepers out there, I humbly and sincerely apologize for our behavior. It doesn't make it forgivable, but I hope it does give some context as to what goes on in the mind of a creeper. Thank you for your time. As a female who's been in the game for 15 years now, I've met a lot of creeps, but only a few who made me feel unsafe. To start off, I've always had a laptop since I was in high school, a luxury back then that I worked hard to earn enough to buy one. My mom almost took my money that I earned for drugs, but luckily, the money that I made in tips were in cash, so it was easier to hide it from her. At first, my mom was mad that I had bought myself a laptop, but she soon forgot, like everything. My dad could care less, and my older brother already had his own. So, I started playing WoW with him at 14, and back then, girls were unheard of. So, I got the usual creeps who would usually back off after hearing my age, or that they were young too. But not this guy. This guy loved that I was underage. I was about 16 and used to creepy guys at this point. No longer a noob at the game or fending off the creeps, it was no surprise a new guy in the guild started hitting on me. Now, I was 16, dumb, young, and really stupid, but I knew I wasn't going to find love on WoW, where you knew no one in real life. Plus, I had the ultimate crush on a guy I could nab because he was my brother's best friend. But in my mind back then, I only wanted him. So it was easy to turn guys down despite being desperate as heck for one guy. But that all changed after my brother's friend went off to college. I had a part-time job with my brother's friend, but girls at work surrounded him, and I became demoralized that I would never find love. Cute 19-year-old guy on Wahoo made me feel wanted. I had a camera phone so I could send and post pictures at that age, and back then I mostly used Facebook, MySpace, and PhotoBucket. I lost a lot of weight my sophomore year, so I posted confidently bikini pics and other pictures thinking that I would lure the attention of my brother's friend, whom was 19. So when this guy who was also 19 liked me, it didn't faze me. He looked the part in his photos and his younger brother was my age, so I thought. He was extremely attractive in his photos, and even proved it was him by holding pictures of items that I had asked for. He started paying for my WoW subscription, which in the long run I realized it was to get my home address and real name. I was so stupid and heartbroken over my brother's friend. Years of teaching myself online safety and the ability to be strong against flirts was all but lost in the fog. We would talk for hours on Ventrilo, and he'd make me feel pretty. I was completely blinded by this point. He sent me gifts and I didn't even question how he had my address. And then he offered to drive and pick me up, as only then did I suddenly get cold feet. I had a good friend on WoW, someone my brother met at PAX and joined the guild, and is still one of my best friends to this day, though we both aren't fond of my older brother. He's 6 years older than me, but never creeped on me. Was more like the protected brother that I lacked. Well, at least till I was 24, and single for the first time, we did hook up, but that's because we were friends for so long. But the distance led to it not turning into a relationship. He caught on to it through conversation and was my words of wisdom in a time I was lacking any of my own. He saw something was fishy when I couldn't. I told my friend that I was scared to meet him because, dumb teenager logic, I thought he wouldn't like me. My friend chimed in that I shouldn't meet anyone off the internet at my age. I told him about the gifts and I swear I've never been scolded out like this in my life, and not even by my own parents, but he always cared like that. He wondered why I would give my address to someone that I never met, and the expensive gifts were not something the average 19-year-old could afford. None of this ever clicked for me, of course, because I was lonely and trying to prove I don't know what to myself, my crush or something, that I could get a boyfriend. Like that, I told the guy it wasn't wise to meet in person, and my parents said I wasn't allowed to. That's when it went dark. At first, it was pestering over and over, guilting me over the gifts that he gave me and encouraging me to defy my parents. While they kept bothering me, it never once occurred to me that he would lose his stuff. While my friend was worried like crazy about the guy having my address, going as far as to drive 11 hours to my house and explain the situation to my dad, as I refused to tell him out of fear of getting in trouble at the time, all the while taking his spring break in my state, instead of his own with his friends. There's a reason he's still one of my best friends. He has a little sister of his own as well, and she's my age, so his protective nature is natural. Eventually, he made me block the guy, and that was that. And the guy was upset. He would go on different accounts and accuse me of gold digging and using him. Luckily, my friend was smart enough and had the foresight to change my WoW password, and even paid for my account for me, taking this guy off of it entirely, as one of the guy's threats was to delete my account. But it didn't end there. It got worse as he would constantly find ways to message me and tell me how horrible I was. Till about a month had passed. I was walking home from school, about a 2-mile walk in wealthy suburbs of New England, which I had done for years. Many kids did it as it was a very safe town with no crime in it or surrounding towns. Without a second thought, I took off with my 100-pound backpack. That may be an overestimate. Put my headphones in and started my 20-minute walk home. It was cold, so I had earmuffs over my headphones, only drowning out the sound more. I swear if I could talk to myself as a kid, I probably would have just slapped myself for stupidity. Because the WoW guy knew that I walked home every day as I would talk about it. He knew my address and I never thought twice. I was on the back roads walking home, and honestly, easy to map from my school to home as it was pretty straightforward with only one turn. At about halfway home, in between songs, I heard a vague crunching sound of tires rolling over gravel on the road slowly. I turned around to see a tinted black car that you couldn't see much of the person in front. I jogged out of the driveway that I was standing in front of, assuming it was waiting to turn in. But it didn't turn in. The roads were dead and it didn't make sense for him not to go around. I swear the saying that you go cold when you're terrified is absolutely true. It could have been a summer's day at 95 degrees, and my bones would have been cold. My heart just sank and my breathing was uncontrollable. I felt like I had no control over my body as I realized this guy was following me. My blood truly ran cold, and my hands shook as tears formed and my skin felt tight. My body felt like it wasn't ready to fight or flight, but simply freeze there and die. It only got worse as the second time I turned my head to see the car stop, and I stopped and my whole world stopped. I couldn't stop staring, just frozen breathing like all my school books were on my chest. Crying silently, my eyes hurt with no tears or sound as I just stood there. The door opened after what felt like hours but only seconds, maybe a minute, and it was in fact him. It was the attractive guy from the photos. Not a catfish, but something seemed different. At first, I thought it was his angry expression, but I soon realized he was definitely not 19, more like 30 plus. I could barely think over the loud sound of my heart racing as it froze me in place. I thought that I was about to throw up as he spoke to me. Told me to get in the car, that he would light my house on fire and take out my dog in front of me. I honestly just couldn't move. Couldn't reach for my phone as his words just froze me. And like some magic, we both failed to notice the little old lady on her porch watching this play out. Suddenly I hear her yell, "Get away from that girl right now before I burn you alive." We both turned to meet her eyes. Pissed off small lady about 60 or 70 with white hair. I think she noticed my frozen in fear state as she told me to get over to her quickly. And like that, I ran over to her, tossing off my heavy brick of a backpack. It was obvious he was unsure of what to do next, as he stood there and watched me run to her. It must have been a sight, seeing this tiny thin old lady standing in front of a teenage girl, yelling at this man to go away. Like that, Savior number 2 joined the battle as her husband stepped out. Guy who looked like he had been through a war or two, with a shotgun of all things and a booming voice. The gun pointed, saying, "I've shot and killed men for less reason. You better leave now." He got into his car and drove off as I simply collapsed. All that fear just came out as I cried harder and harder, as my brain sifted through the past few months of mistakes. After calming me down enough to speak in non-hyperventilating words, she asked me if I knew him. I told her kind of, but only online from video games, not real life. Of course, explaining it wasn't easy, and her husband couldn't grasp why I would want to pretend I was at war. I'm sure in his experience he was thinking Call of Duty, not magical creatures in a game called World of Warcraft. She got on the phone with the school counselor. Her daughter apparently had told her my name. I was well known to her daughter, ironically, but it was only 250 or less kids in the school, and the town itself was pretty small. Many staff at our school had a family in town, kids that were related to either by their own children or their siblings' children. It was the kind of town if you didn't leave by a certain age, you were stuck there. So honestly, it seems ironic but entirely not a huge surprise. The counselor was well aware of my family and my mom's drug addiction, as child services had been involved a few times. She came by in 10 minutes to pick me up and asked me a ton of questions, of course knowing I didn't want to involve police as I was scared of being taken away from my parents again. For your information, foster care was worse than a mom drugged out on prescriptions. We weren't rich, but we were more well off than many. Though my mom worked, my dad kept my mom on a tight budget to keep her from buying prescriptions from Canada she wasn't prescribed, hence her trying to take my money. She knew all of this and knew how rough I was better off than foster care, which was a gamble with losing odds at best. Plus, 2 more years and I would be off to college anyway, so we didn't involve the cops. But she made me promise to take the bus every day and to inform my dad of the situation. She also called my dad at work to inform him and had a teacher make sure I got on the bus every day till I graduated. Even it really sucked, but I understood. If it ended there, it would be nice, but there's still a bit more and I'm sorry for the length and grammar. It's a late night and I'm recalling from memory and typing on my phone. 2 days after this, my dad had to fly out for business and my brother was off at college, so it left me and my high mom, who promised my dad she would stay sober while he was gone. But I was used to helping her while she was high. It was like taking care of a child. But I was on edge, as every creak in that big house from the 60s, a cat stir at night, and dog barking outside set me on edge. I barely slept. My friend from WoW called me every night, making sure I was okay for the past month. I lived in the middle of the woods, next to a huge river in my backyard, so there was still a lot of wildlife outside in the dead silence of cold months. Running water is an important source of water when lakes freeze. I had been used to all the bumps in the night, cats coming and going and dogs barking at every animal in the yard. But it all seemed new to me as I laid in bed trying to drown out my fears. The house that I grew up in was a 6-bedroom house. I had a little sister too, but she stayed with my grandma in another state per a court order, while I was allowed to choose due to her only being 9 and me 16. The other rooms were used as a game room, office for my dad, and guest room, mostly for when my sister visited my grandma and her and they had a room. So in a large house like that in the middle of the woods, it was scary to be virtually alone because my mom accounted for defenseless. I was letting my last cat inside for the night. 5 cats who all knew to come in at night for dinner and stayed until the morning. And at the end of the long driveway between my neighbor and our house was a parked black car. I quickly shut the door and locked it after my cat got inside. I made sure all 5 doors were locked and even put cardboard on the glass doors to the pool. I don't know, hoping if he broke them, it would delay him if that car was his. I went and I turned off all the lights, and I got all my cats into one room so I knew they were safe. Here's the thing about my dog. He's untrained for the most part, but was basically a giant lab puppy in his mind. But he did growl at strangers, not bark like at animals. We had to keep him inside if we had guests, but he never bit anyone, and if you spent enough time with him, he would eventually accept you. Also, he didn't growl at all strangers either, so he wasn't the most reliable guard dog either, but he was big and had a deep bark. I mulled over what to do as I sat there in the dark with my dog, waiting for shadows to pass by the window. I eventually went upstairs to my mom's room and woke her up from her sleeping pill slumber. Groggy and still kind of high, she didn't quite grasp what I was telling her till I started crying. She was sort of sobered up and asked me to get her some coffee, and I did. All the while, I'm watching my dog's every move, because I knew he could sense something before I did. As my mom sobered, her fear in her eyes grew. Eventually, she got the idea to call my neighbors and ask them if they knew the car. After they all said no, 2 of the men went out to their house to check the car together. The car was empty. At closer inspection though, they noticed it was a newer car, a Lexus, and in the passenger seat was a laptop. The car was locked, but with a flashlight you could see somewhat into the tinted windows. They had never told us why, but something they saw in the car prompted them to call the local sheriff. The only one, and he lived in town, sort of thing. We were too small to have a police department. He drove over about 15 minutes later, ran the plate, and asked the houses around about it. Apparently, it was a rental car from Ohio, and he was calling to see who was rented, but the offices were closed, I think. He stuck around in his car for about an hour, until someone came out of the woods, and ran back in as the cop turned his spotlight on. I couldn't see what he was pointing at with his light, as it was at the side of my house, and I was looking at the front. I guess he called for backup, as 3 other cop cars showed up in 5 minutes of it, from the neighboring town highway patrol. At which, a lady cop got out, as I asked to speak with her, and she called my counselor at school to explain who that might be. I was pretty shy back then, but I don't know. Something about a female cop made me feel more comfortable to open up to. I told her the gist of the story, and then she called my counselor, who backed up my story but also explaining why I was scared of cops, because my history of foster care and not wanting to go back. At which a mostly sober mom joined me, hugging me, doing her typical apologetic routine, but also offering much needed comfort as she called my dad too. Eventually, the lady cop asked if she could take a look around the house to see if things were secure, and get any information from my laptop about him. In her search, she found something I didn't think about checking. The basement door was not just unlocked, but open. It's never unlocked, so I didn't even think to check it, as our backyard floods in the spring due to beaver dams, and it's got extra seals and stuff to prevent the basement from flooding. Again, but the stuff sealing it, which was mostly sandbags and stuff, were set aside. But the door at the bottom of the stairs was locked still, and though it had some damage, like someone tried picking it, but he had access to half the basement that was storage. The basement was sectioned and the other half used to be used for my brother's parties. The door between these sections was like a front door, not an indoor door. As in the summer, my dad left the hatch open to dry out the basement and adjust pool settings, as it was basically the pool house, and the cats loved it, so they also had a few cat beds. The section that led upstairs was locked from the inside, and the wall and door were not drywall and cheap door, but lock and key heavy door, and wall was brick. Upon noticing this, my dad confirmed that he had not left it open. My suspicions that the black car was his was pretty much confirmed. As we walked through the house to make sure everything was still safe, she got on my laptop as they searched the woods. I gave her everything I had, his photos, a username, and she even checked to see if his credit card was still on my account, but it wasn't. But the last few digits were there. She then asked to take my laptop for a few days, as she thought she could get some good evidence from it. I asked her to please not damage it and return it as soon as possible, because I used it a lot. Before smartphones, it was all I had. After a few hours and onlooking neighbors had gone to bed, the cops came back empty-handed, but left a cop outside our house and towed the guy's car. From what the lady cop had told me, what permitted such fear was there were 2 guns in the car, some sort of rope and handcuffs, and the guy who ran back into the dense woods was wearing a winter ski mask, not out of season but suspicious nonetheless. So eventually, I try and lay down and go to sleep, but I'm pretty sure I was going to call in sick tomorrow, and I kept all my cats inside for the day. I was too restless to sleep. Every sound made me so scared. My mom slept with the dog in her room. I'm very allergic to animals, but less to cats, as I kind of built up a tolerance to them, but not dogs really. And my cats slept in my room most nights by choice, as my room was usually the warmest. At 3:30 a.m., I heard a knock at the back door, and a guy say, maybe an undercover police officer, "Open up." I was still awake as I walked downstairs to make out a guy standing in the dark with a gun. As he saw me, he demanded that I let him in now, as he needed to speak with me. Something felt off. My gut knew it before I did that this guy's voice seemed forced, like someone purposely making their voice deeper. And why was he at the back door? So I turned on the light outside, and sure enough, it was him. I just screamed as quickly as I screamed, and he started hitting the door hard. It wasn't a very loud horror movie scream, but more like a gasp scream. I didn't think the fear in my body had a loud scream to let out, but the banging was pretty loud as I ran to the front to see if the officer was still outside. He was, but he wasn't getting out of his car. I didn't want to run outside as I'm not a fast runner, so I turned the porch lights on and off a couple of times, but still nothing. After a minute, my dog came bolting down to the door, barking and growling, nearly foaming at the mouth. Soon followed my mom, who yelled she had a gun. She didn't, but a bluff is a bluff. Somehow during all of this, the cop outside had snuck around back and had his gun pointed at him, yelling to put his gun down. I hid as the arrest went down, but he was arrested. No trial needed for me to attend, and my statement was enough. Come to find out, he wasn't even from America. The car was rented under his friend's name, and after all was done, he was deported back to Canada. I assumed something with his passport would prevent him from coming back to the USA, as the cop reassured me he wouldn't be back anytime soon. I don't know what exactly he was charged with, but I think my dad said assault with a deadly weapon, attempted kidnapping, and something else. And it also turned out that he was 32 years old, not 19. So I assume me being a minor carried a charge. And life moved on from there. I had plenty of creeps before and after, but he was by far the worst from WoW. I had a couple from streaming, but I was an adult and much better at staying safe online. Only one worse than this guy was my ex-boyfriend's cousin, who made my life hell for a couple of years, but that's another story for another time.